Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Speculate one-shot. Today, we are going to be playing a world-building game called A Land Once Magic by Viditya Voletti, who is a game designer with a variety of games out. And if you are watching live, I will put information about A Land Once Magic and Viditya in the chat. And if you are listening, the information will be in the show notes. So A Land Once Magic is a world-building game. If you watched Valorword, you might have seen our game of Ex Novo, which is a world-building and map-making game. This is a bit different, but is still in that kind of world-building game genre of RPG is maybe the best way to think about it. And so I'm very excited to be joined by two of my friends and colleagues who are also science fiction and fantasy writers and professionals. We play in a different game together that is not broadcast, streamed, or recorded anywhere except upon our souls because it is a good game. So I will let my friends introduce themselves briefly, and then I will reintroduce myself to anyone who is new to the show, and then we'll get started. So Marianne, briefly tell us about who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Marianne Kirby. I write speculative fiction, primarily sort of a soft horror, and I do a lot of fat activism and nonfiction. You can find me at various places online as The Rotund, which was the name of my fat activism blog. Words are hard. And I just always want to know what creeps people out.
Excellent. AJ.
Yeah, I'm AJ Hackwith. I am the author of a fantasy series called the Hell's Library, the first book of which is The Library of the Unwritten. It's a fantasy series that centers around a library in hell, which contains all the books never written, all the stories never told. And it's a fun romp. That's a completed series, so it's out in bookstores now by Ace Books, Penguin Random House. Love for people to read it. I'm working on a new series now, and you can find me, I'm on the internet under AJ Hackwith at a lot of places. I'm pretty idle because I am busy writing away stories, but always happy to say hi. I occasionally post photos to Instagram, and I'm active there and have Patreon, and love talking about games and stories and storytelling. So excited to play this game here.
Excellent. And so for the folks that are watching, you will be able to see both that AJ has an amazing glowing D20 in the background and that Marianne has two cute plastic dinosaurs in the background of their image. So bonus content if you're watching video on Twitch or YouTube. So
One of them is being written by Shipwreck.
Oh, very nice. I was just talking about GI Joes with my trainer yesterday, and that Toys That Made Us thing on Netflix, talking about
I love that
the
show.
commercialism of toy cartoons.
Yeah.
Very
The whole
cool.
point of being an adult is to be able to finally afford the toys that you were denied as a child. So
100%. Like
Absolutely.
teenage Mike would be so jealous of how much time I spend playing role playing games now. So I'm just living my best life for them. So I am Mike Underwood. I write as Michael R. Underwood. I do action adventure, science fiction, fantasy. I've done urban fantasy, epic fantasy, space opera. And right now I'm working on a rom-com, which is a lot of fun. I am one of the three co-hosts of Speculate, along with Gregory A. Wilson, who is the host here at twitch.tv/Arvin Elleron, as well as Brandon O'Brien, who was the GM for our Fractal Spire series and is working on a new thing, for which I will do plotty fingers. But for today, it's just me with my two friends here, and we're going to create a world out of nothing, the way that you do when you're a writer. So we are playing A Land Once Magic, and this game there's going to be like 4-ish phases, but this first section is kind of like doing a session 0 for our world building game. And what we're going to do is first we're going to pick some paints to put in our palette, like we are, basically we're setting ourselves up to know what we're then using to do this other creation. So instead of like implicitly drawing on touchstones and going for vibes, we're going to talk about vibes and touchstones and then use them. And that way we will be able to refer to these in the lovely Google Doc that I have here that you are seeing if you are watching on video. I will try to make it so that podcast listeners will be able to get access to the palette and touchstones to make that easier to keep track of. Mike, remember this in the future. So the first thing to do is we're going to come up with paints. I'm going to read a little bit of directly from the text here because I will let the author speak for the game here. Before you begin crafting the world, you must decide on some paints and set a palette that everyone will be painting with. Paints are heavily descriptive words that help everyone get on the same page with the type of world you'll be crafting together. And then there is a list of suggested paints below with words like acrid, lush, rooted, vibrant, eerie, melodious, wayward, jagged. And so, here we're going for evocative, we're going for mood. This is kind of foundational vibes, is what I will say here. And basically, it says each player should create or pick 2 paints and write them down. Don't show the other players. So what I think maybe that looks like is everybody type your 2 paints into our Zoom chat, and then we're going to do a countdown to posting them. And we'll reveal them all at the same time, and then we'll pick some from that. So the list in the game book is suggested, but you are not limited to these if you don't want to be, if you have something else that you think would be cool.
So we should pick 2?
We should each pick 2.
All right.
Okay, so I have my 2. I'm also just talking to fill time. Okay, so we're going to do a countdown. 3, 2, 1, post. All right, and then I will read these out. I'm going to read from the bottom up, so I'm not putting myself first. So we have candlelit, hallowed, haunted, saturated, coarse, and melodious.
I like that we also all separated them differently. Like we cannot get a consistent schema here.
Yes, that is also pretty amusing. So once everyone has written out 2, reveal them at the same time, discuss amongst each other which paints you want in the game. Each player gets the final say on at least 1 paint. So, Marianne, are there any of these that really excite you?
I really love candlelit, just as not just mood, but also you can draw so much about the environment and the rest of the setting from something that is candlelit. I really like that one.
Okay.
Yeah, that even plays with your saturated too, because candlelit colors are rich and moody and saturated. Yeah.
Sure. Very cool. AJ, what is standing out to you in this list?
Well, I guess an interesting thing to bring up is it's the differences between haunted and hallowed.
Right. So what's that difference for you as you kind of interpret it?
I think hallowed is haunted, but worn in, broken in denim kind of haunted. It's the kind of, it's the hallowed that's it's the haunted that's softer and worn in the bones. It's less personified and more I'm not thinking of hallowed like religious, but hallowed as a place that is potent with past.
Something was once here.
Yes.
Don't necessarily
here was once something.
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of thing.
So I added hallowed like worn in denim as a a kind of refined, dig in a little bit deeper notation there for us to keep track of.
But I like both of them, so
I like the tension between them. Absolutely.
I do. I think almost the tension between them could be a
That's
paint.
where
Yeah.
there's like really there's interesting stuff there.
Right, because if we stopped here at candlelit, hallowed, and haunted, I feel like we have a tension in hallowed and haunted where they could be pulling against one another or they could be kind of pushing together somewhere. And then we have candlelit, which is kind of on like an intersecting axis. It suggests maybe a little bit in the way of technology, and also to me like a certain sense of intimacy, because candles will only light so far unless you get them in such a mass, right?
I think it also introduces a human factor,
Sure.
right? Like things can be haunted by absolutely non-human things. Things can be hallowed in that sense as well. But candles, like that takes people making them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do we want to add any other paints from this list of 6, or something that wasn't on the list that we think would be a great complement here? I think there's probably room for one more that maybe points in a different direction or adds some different dimension. We will also add touchstones.
So I say I always kind of like a dissonant note
Mm-hmm.
in something, and it feels like coarse kind of feeds into that, right? In a way that melodious would not.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. I am certainly down with this. So folks watching on YouTube and Twitch will learn, as they probably learned before, that I am not the world's cleanest typist. So just don't at me. Okay, so that gives us candlelit, hallowed, haunted, and coarse. Do we feel good about those?
I think so.
Okay. So once we've done that, we move on to touchstones. The book says everyone then picks one piece of media not traditionally considered fantasy they want to draw an aspect of inspiration from as a touchstone. Now, A Land Once Magic is labeled as a game of post-fantasy world building. Now, what post-fantasy means will be up to our interpretation. The first thing that comes to mind for me is the very, very first world building episode for the actual play show Friends at the Table, where host and GM of their first series, Austin Walker, talked about wanting to make a post-fantasy world, where this is a world that used to have an epic fantasy era and vibe, but then the world moved on from there. And we could do that, or this could be post-fantasy in some other way.
I feel like that's the day after you finish a Fall of Magic game.
Mm.
Like whatever that world has become, that's post fantasy.
Yeah, because that makes me ask, like, what part are we post? Are we post the epic? Are we post the magic? There's a section in the book where we will get to talk about magic in this setting, so we'll definitely be able to explore that.
Yeah, because like that interests me especially because like they say like the magic fades, the magic is gone. Well, nothing ever. Everything always leaves a hollow, an empty spot. There's something that is created by something dwindling or fading. Any resource in a natural environment does. So I won't get. I'll wait until the point in the game where we get into it. But that if it is the fall of magic, then it definitely doesn't mean it's entirely gone, or it hasn't shaped things on its way down. And at what point is it faded to?
Yeah, I think that's a very cool angle.
It's not an on-off switch, definitely.
I'm using facilitator privilege to take a note, magic and residue / haunting / hallow, as something maybe we can loop back around to. But next thing up is touchstones. AJ, you already shared a touchstone. Would you be okay to talk a little bit about it and what you find inspiring about it?
Sure. I recently there's this artist on Etsy that I have been just admiring for the longest time, and I finally was able to splurge and get a couple of their prints, which I just adore. And it's these fantastic. They have a very, I don't know how to talk about art, but it's a very like kind of classical realistic style, kind of like it looks like it'd be one of those like classic oil paintings of like your great grand ancestor in their Victorian garb, um, portraits, you know, that some rich person would have hanging in their hall. Only all these, the ones that this artist does, often has like a like scruggly monster and as a pet instead of a hunting dog or a little lap dog or whatever. And the artist is Omar Ryan, right? Rayan. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I will make sure we have the links in the video if Mike can help me out with that.
Yep.
And I just love their work, and I have one of their prints in my hallway in this big, overly ornate frame. And we joke that that's our new predecessor for the household. It's the new house matriarch of our family.
Very nice.
And I think that it was my touchstone. I was thinking of how to describe what I liked about this touchstone. And I think um, kind of the old master weird kind
Oh,
of
sure.
style, the sense of history, but that creeping of like something unsettlingly different in the background kind of thing, but it's like right pressed up right up there with society and civilization too.
Mm.
So like that kind of sense of the refinement meets the monstrous is what I think I wanted to pull from that touchstone. Unless
Cool.
someone had like even a cooler observation.
So that little being with this person looks to me like, what if we had the middle ground between, like, the middle of a triangle of lizard, slug, and I don't know, like a dog, maybe?
I love that portrait so much. The portraits, that picture's name on the artist's website I believe is Pookie, and I love it because I foster animals for the local rescue, and so I love, we always get these like giant beasts of a dog that seem monstrous at first, but they're just the sweetest creatures. And so I always just think of the big lugs of dogs and stuff that
Okay.
I
Yeah, I
always end up
just
fostering.
I went
It
and
is. It's a picture for the podcast listeners. If you aren't looking at the photo right now through the link, it's a very refined. Oh, what would you call that dress? Like was that Victorian era, Edwardian? It's a historical dressed lady, and she's just looking calmly at the camera as there is this like almost like slug-like beast just kind of like curled up behind her with its tail curled, and she's just got its tail in its hand, and it's just kind of peering around her like almost like it's more afraid of the camera than and hiding from it.
right. Yeah, and I like how it this piece for me feels like it's all in a fairly tight, like, orange color story, where there's not a lot of contrast between the different elements, but that to me makes them all feel like they go together.
Yeah, it's that warm, um very like saturated, kind of like soft.
Yeah.
It's not harsh. Perhaps candlelit.
Very cool. Marianne, did you have anything you wanted to share about this piece before we move on?
I just I just love the piece, and I've been looking at the artist's website basically since you shared it.
Nice.
So I mean you have definitely started a thing. I like it because it is very much the incorporation of like the fantastical and the mundane all together. And I love that. I love that kind of like treatment of the fantastical, I guess. But also I love anything that positions the stuff we're supposed to be afraid of as the familiar, you
Right.
know, our constant companions.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So what touchstone would you like to bring, Marianne?
In a previous life, years ago, I was a science editor at a textbook company, and I produced a whole bunch of fourth grade science books. And fourth grade science is really concerned with the natural world a great deal, but also cycles. And so ever since then, right, like I think about cycles a lot. I think, and sometimes it's literal, it's the water cycle, it's the seed and plant cycle, it's the cycle of decay, that kind of thing. And I always am sort of aware of the cyclic nature of things, and so that's kind of the thematic touchstone I was really thinking about, the constant emergence, I guess, of life from decay and decay from life. Just to turn up the
Mm-hmm.
gothness of this podcast, I guess.
Very cool. Um, so I think cyclicality is a really great touchstone for work when we are thinking very consciously about something like a passing of ages, right? Because we have the time we're talking about now is in dialogue with the time that it is succeeding, and so like the idea of focusing on what emerges from moving past fantasy or a collapse or something feels like it does tie into this notion of like haunting and hallowing, but not necessarily in like a only one way, right? Because life emerges from decay, decay emerges from life, and that also lets us think about the falling of a past age, which I think we'll get some prompts on.
Yeah. What are the mushrooms that pops up from the decay of magic?
Yeah.
So
If thoughts on that for our other game.
I'm gonna be on my bullshit, and I'm gonna bring a tango song.
Awesome.
So if for most people, if you know one tango song, this is the song you know. It's called La Comparsita, and it is traditionally the song that is played at the very end of a night of dancing. And if you will excuse my a cappella rendition, I'm just going to share a little bit about it and then talk about it to convey the sense of vibes, because otherwise I would need us all to stop and listen to this music for like 4 minutes. But maybe I'll share a link so that folks can listen to it on break if you want. But it goes dum 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 da 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 dum 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 da 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 dum 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 da 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 dum da 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 dum da da dum. And so that last bit is used in like a zillion movies,
Mm-hmm.
and it has the thing in traditional Argentine tango where a lot of the songs end with a dun dun, and like dancers traditionally will find some kind of like exaggerated, really cool position to end the song in, so that they can look cool and show off to one another. Because for me, Argentine tango is this thing that was like a huge lifeline for me when I was in grad school, because I went to college in the town where I had graduated from high school. I stayed friends with a lot of people that I was friends with in high school. And then I got through undergrad and I moved across the country to do my grad work. And I didn't know anybody. So I had this complete social upheaval. And for the first semester I was there, I like, thank goodness I lived in a house with a lot of roommates, because otherwise I just would have like absolutely shriveled as a social being. But in the second quarter, because this was on quarter system, I took an introductory Argentine tango class and just absolutely fell in love with the style because it's deeply improvisational. I kind of brought my martial arts experience to tango and was able to apply some of that same like kinesthetic intelligence and interpretation and improvisation in a collaborative fashion, which like an interesting fight between like friends, like sparring can be collaborative, but dancing is collaborative in a really different way. And then there's just like tons and tons of aesthetics poured on top of it, right? Like people in the suits and the dresses and fancy shoes and cool hair. And La Comparsita is this kind of, it's like a metonym for Argentine tango as a vibe overall for me. And so the thing I want to bring to the game is not just the song specifically, but some of that sense of refined, conscious aesthetic in presentation, and a kind of like sweeping string instruments, and like kind of, I feel like it goes well with candlelit, because, you know, lighting in tango is often like a really big thing. And so that it gives some stuff that is material in a different way in terms of like suggesting social dance that's highly ritualized.
I feel like it turns up, drama is not the right word. It turns up the spectacle of it,
Sure.
like the performance of the spectacle, which will be fun.
Cool. So I'm just going to make some extra notes here. Ambiance, ritual, and social ritual here. So like candlelit, haunted, goth, monster, cyclicality, you know, just kind of how, if we throw all of these things together, like where are we sort of heading?
Yeah, because, you know, like, especially if we're like creating a world where there's a thing in like great decline, like magic, often when there's like a shift like that, like society will respond by having like increased amping up some other aspect of like social connections and things. And so like
Right.
an intense dance scene would be right along those lines.
Yeah, and like,
Or, you know, or nothing fills that void, and then you are left with the consequences of the lack.
It's true.
sure, because
Yeah.
what AJ, what your last comment makes me think of is regional identity increasing when you move away from home.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like people like, oh, I didn't watch the Bears growing up, but then I moved from Chicago to San Francisco, and watching Bears games let me connect with regional identity in such a way, like paralleling or intersecting that with like, oh, parts of our world are falling away, and so we grip more tightly to things that maybe didn't matter as much to us before, but we've come to imbue them with some extra meaning.
Well, it's like during the Black Plague, there was these dancing crazes and these dance fevers that village would grip villages because I'm not a historian. I don't know the full historical mark of it, but they went hand in hand because of the grimness of the terror that was sweeping the areas. Also went hand in hand with these like different things going along. So yeah, that's fun to play with.
Okay.
We are getting a very fun, gothic,
Yeah.
exciting drama as fuck world.
Yeah.
Yes.
In retrospect, the aesthetic that I gave us for the overlay is not totally in keeping with what we've ended up with, but that's fine. Like what I came up with is a little bit gentler, but maybe I can figure out like a title card that will fit our vibe more
I
suitably.
was like thinking like with the words suggest, I was like, oh, like cozy and handmade, but I'm like, no.
Yeah, and what we have doesn't necessarily automatically suggest, doesn't have to suggest grim, right? Because we can
Oh
have
no.
different things, and so we'll get to explore that space a little bit more.
But there's definitely some very exciting rituals that happen.
Sure.
Very cool.
So the game says, discuss amongst yourself how you want to record what you've come up with. We have done so on our Google Doc. The game can easily be played as a writer's room game. What you choose to record and take with you is entirely up to you. And so this is literally a writer's room game in that we have a Zoom room full of writers. So the next step was we're going to use a deck of traditional playing cards, and we're going to draw 3 cards to detail a legend of this land that kind of has moved on or has changed from a fantasy place. We're going to talk through the legend, and then we're going to use the same cards that we drew to talk about magic in this world. So Marianne, you have a deck of cards.
Yeah.
Could you draw us 3 cards from this deck?
Very excited about this. I love this. Here we go. I shuffled a lot before, y'all. It's not just that I am like shuffling twice. It's that I shuffled a great deal before, but I can't like not shuffle again.
Sure.
Okay. So we have. Okay. I'm like, oh, the Oracle speaks. We have the 7 of Hearts. We have the 9 of Clubs. And we have the 5 of Clubs.
Okay. So I'm going to
those
read.
translate into something.
Yeah, and so this is page 3 of the book. I will read the first section. Does everybody have the book up? Because that way we can spread this out, and it's not just me talking. So a legend is told of, and then we have 7 of Hearts. So Hearts, an unbeatable monarch, and the kind of examples that are given, that we don't have to use these names, but these are the vibes. The Crimson Sword, Soul's Lance, the Vermilion Hammer. Do we want to identify all 3 of our prompts and then try to figure it out, or go one at a time?
Let's identify all of our prompts if you're
Okay.
cool with that, AJ.
Yeah. I think so.
So
the unbeatable monarch is represented by a 1978 circus style theatrical one sheet for A New Hope.
oh, wow. Oh yeah, that I think that's in a pack of posters, Star Trek poster or Star Wars posters that I bought a few years ago. AJ, do you want to read what a 9 of Clubs gives us for the second section?
Sure. A legend is told of an unbeatable monarch, and their tales of, clubs would be foundational morality.
This is a theatrical release Japanese poster of Empire Strikes Back.
Okay. And Marianne, can you do the third section?
Yes. A legend is told of an unbeatable monarch. Their tales tell of foundational morality. But now the legend has been warped, giving rise to industry. And another Empire Strikes Back poster.
All right. So we're supposed to figure
Industry, y'all.
All right. So we want to take these one by one then? Or should we divide these up? How do we want to do this?
So I'm just writing out the full things that we have, like a text to go with. But I'm happy to kind of zoom in and out because these are all going to fit together.
The Vermilion Hammer sounds dirty. So, it just does. I'm sorry. Any kind of hammer.
Yeah, and I'd say we don't have to use any of these names if we don't want.
Let's see, an unbeatable monarch.
So I want to know, do we think that this unbeatable monarch now, like, because we're looking back, right? Is this unbeatable monarch, does a residue of them remain as hallow or haunting? Like, do we want to start connecting back to our palette here?
I was thinking about tallow, actually, and how like it's used to make candles.
So what kind of spins out of that for you?
I just started. That's where it started.
Okay. Because tallow will like is that I think about like dripping wax. I think about like dipping the string to kind of accrete the candle. Um, Foundational
Like a
morality.
candle that doesn't burn out, a wax that doesn't ever.
Like an unbeatable monarch and an eternal flame of some kind.
Yeah, eternal flame. We can do better than that.
We totally can do better than that, but that's like the
Uh,
Yeah.
unceasing wick.
Yeah.
um,
I'm going to like I unquenched is
unquenched.
it's a little much in the mouth, but it does suggest fire. Um, it's like eternal flame, like that's just a thing that people do where they have like the gas and it keeps the thing going. Um, Makes me I think of like hearth, if like gets us more homey, but then like bonfire maybe suggests ritual. Conflagration is a great fire word.
What is the name for the candle that is the the altar candle that lights all the other candles?
oh,
Not taper. There's a specific
there's a
name for it.
specific name for it. Yeah.
It seems monarchy.
We are,
Google.
yeah, I was gonna say, like, we are all on the internet. Do you do that in conversations where there's like a room of 8 people all holding onto their phones and everyone's like, gee, I wonder this thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then like nobody bothers to look it up?
Well,
Uh,
there's a term for the specifically the candle and the menorah, but I didn't want
yeah.
specifically that. I was thinking there was a more generalized
Right.
term.
Well, we could invent our own.
Yeah.
Because that like if we're doing that way, we could look at the source. We could. Um,
Yeah, like a candle term that sounds like scepter but isn't.
mm,
Like taper at cigarette.
Is
but
there
Like
a,
the constant the constant taper, the constant wickerant, the
because
constant flame, the constant.
another way to go would be like the tallow queen.
I did think about like the
Yes.
tallow lord, that sort of thing. Um,
Let's have a queen.
yeah.
Why not? Empress.
Um,
And
The there's cast too, because with candles you can cast in wax.
mm,
and like
yeah.
the soy paraffin, paraffin empress, clean burning with a wooden wick. Um, I like the tallow queen a lot. I feel like it. I feel like sometimes we go really complicated because we're trying to imbue names with like
Right.
all the meaning.
Trying to have the perfect one, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe like pencil in tallow queen. We have now the legend has warped, giving rise to industry. So the legend has warped. So what about the change in how people thought about the tallow queen and the foundational morality led to industry? I feel like candle to industry, not too hard.
Yeah, I had a good one for that because like the Tallow Queen was this foundational morality that she was this light in the darkness and she was that altar candle that brought light to the other unlit candles of the world. But over time, her legend has faded, and in the minds of weak men, it has now become simply that one bitter nub of candle that you can eke out another day's labor of during the night. The Tallow Queen gives you that second day of job to side hustle in.
The
It's
tallow queen now only rules over the graveyard shift.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Um,
And I mean, obviously, the sort of thing we wind up playing with there is literally the burning the candle at both ends
yeah, that's
idioms,
Yes.
right?
yeah,
Like,
literally what I was writing down. Because then, because it's like, if you are, if you something about like the Tallow Queen's light, then becomes the idiom for burn the candle at both ends,
There's
right?
some kind of saucy double entendre about the Tallow Queen there if you're
yeah.
in
Right.
this world.
Or like, if it's more saucy, is it like, the Tallow Queen's consort? I'm like, or I'm keeping vigil with the Tallow Queen. Um, you get something about wicks.
I do feel like keeping vigil with the Tallow Queen. That does sound loaded.
Dipping your wick too with the
Mm-hmm.
Tallow
Yeah,
Queen. You
definitely.
know.
So what is the Tallow Queen's foundational morality, or what foundational morality is she associated with? Is it like, about like hard work or honest work, or like sharing something with others?
I AJ, when you were talking about how like now you work second shift, I was thinking about like, well, before it became second shift, like the light in the darkness was so that you could, you know, spend time with family, so that you could pursue like pleasurable things, so that you had more safety in general, but also that like that luxury of reading and all of those sorts of like downtime activities
Hmm.
that you lose when you are working two jobs or whatever, but also that I mean we could only really do when we had light.
Maybe the Tallow Queen's foundational morality was she was the symbol of driving back the haunted night.
Yeah.
The idea of the magic haunted night that was full of, superstition or not, was full of the possibilities and the frights of the coming darkness. And now with the fading of magic, um, that's not such a big concern and superstition for the people of this world, and the light has come to just represent more time for capitalism.
Yeah.
Right. So then, is it about that lighting a light to a certain degree is always also recognizing and respecting the power of darkness, right? Because you only need a light because you need to cast away the darkness.
I think also lighting a light is sharing that safety with others, because yeah, the light only goes so far, but if enough people have light, you create a larger area that can contain lots of other people, and everybody doesn't have to have their own individual candle if they're together,
Right.
right? So I think that there is something, if we're talking about a foundational morality, there is something about a community and being together.
You're right. So if the foundational morality is like light for community and pleasure, and
Yeah.
then the legend gets warped, giving rise to industry, right? That gets us to the uh, burning the candle at both ends thing, where people aren't lighting candles to share time with one another unless they're coworkers or something.
Are they not afraid of the dark anymore for some reason? Like,
Good
is the
question.
magic specifically associated with the darkness? And with the fading of magic, they're just not afraid of the dark anymore?
Yeah, like, okay, so I'm thinking, is there something in the candles that we can, like, do we try to bring in coarseness somewhere, or is that some other quality of this world, or is the coarseness social?
I was gonna say perhaps the things in the dark that scare them are things that a candle won't drive away anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So the thing that makes me think about is, what if it was never the candle? It was always the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ritual of it. Because I don't really love the idea of like making darkness bad necessarily by symbolism. So it's less about pushing away the darkness and more about there was some ritual that perhaps was also lost with time until
And
there was just the symbolism and it was misconstrued.
I don't think that things have to be bad for people to be afraid of them. I think that it's the unknown, right? Like, if there is something that the darkness represents, I think it is just the unknown and the unknowable. Um, but definitely not bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, is it also that, like, going back to the industry, is it also that they just don't make candles the way they used to? Right. Introducing coarseness as a sort of like consequence of losing that touchstone, that ritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we're playing with here in this question specifically is that we're not just losing it's not just magic this world is losing, it's also losing knowledge and nuance
Yeah.
along the way.
Cool. So shall we take these cards over to the magic and talk about that a little bit? I feel like we should feel free to loop back around through things, but I don't want us to get caught on any one section too long.
Yeah.
Okay, so magic, we have a 7, a 9, and a 5. So those are, how does magic manifest in the senses, if any? What natural laws does magic allow you to bend? And was magic discovered, given, or created? So, any thoughts on those questions?
I think, considering the palette words we've chosen, that magic in the senses in this world should be very tactile.
Yeah.
I think it should be very, because we have coarse and um, we have the decay and we have the dancing and we have all that. I think magic should be felt almost like a vibration. It should be very tactile feeling. Um, it's not so much a smell or a sound or even visible. It's something that's felt in the bones, and I think maybe that's why it's tied up with this feeling of the cycle of life and rot, and it's in the earth itself because it's so tactile. It cannot be, it absolutely cannot be unwound from our natural world, and that's why when it's fading like this, it's had such a big effect on everything. It's coarse.
Yeah.
So we've got, if they've got a very tactile magic, and we have the Tallow Queen who shares her light, and there's connections to sociality and ritual and maybe leisure, but then eventually gives way to industry. Do we think that did the Tallow Queen discover magic, create magic, take or learn about magic from somewhere else, or does magic come not from the Tallow Queen, or is not associated directly?
I feel like that's one of the things that's changed, right? Like, I think that she didn't invent magic, right? I think probably it was a one of those discoveries that lots of people discover lots of little bits of. But over time, what has happened in this warping is the message that she has given it to people.
So that makes me think of like, oh, okay, was magic like a candlestick accreted over time in the way that you dip
Mhm.
the one time I did candle making as a kid is I'm drawing all of my knowledge from this, so like I could be totally wrong, because then like the like a folkloric accretion of magical practice, right? Where instead of like an orthodoxy, where it's like somebody walks out of a cave and like, cool, here's 100 things about magic. Instead someone does a thing and something unexpected happens, and then over time it accretes. If I'm understanding what you're suggesting, Marianne.
That is what I was suggesting, yeah. And then
I
like later the codification thereof during this like warping.
yeah, I like the idea of it being actually very like granular and folk accessible, but warped over time. It's become this thing that was given to us by the queen herself.
Right.
Um, that it was, granted by the higher ups in society, even though it's actually, it's folkloric. I that's a it's not one of our words, but I like the idea if it's something that's coarse and something that's as simple as, candle making is so beautiful because you can make candles out of the meanest ingredients, and you can make them so many different ways. You can make them out of animal fat, you can make them out of so many different basic things. And I think that if this magic is the same way, it is so inherent to everyone in this world that um yeah, it's not given, but it's become that.
Right.
It's
It's
grammar.
become distant from that.
It's grammar. It's we used to have a whole bunch of different grammars describing usage, and now we have like one prescriptivist approach.
Well, it's like mushrooms. Mushrooms are everywhere. They are
Yeah.
decay. They grow anywhere stuff is decaying, and stuff is decaying everywhere, but they are, they've become a symbol of class in gourmet and in food. And you'll pay hundreds of dollars for specific types of mushrooms prepared a certain types of way.
Right. So what then with kind of folkloric practice that got codified and like appropriated, and kind of almost like a sense of grammar, what what can you use magic to change in the world? What natural laws does magic allow you to bend, do we think?
Do we think that because this is we're touchstoning on so much natural cycle of life stuff, that that's the core of this kind of magic?
So is that like necromancy, healing?
I mean, those are two sides of the same
I was
coin to
gonna say
me.
it's the same thing.
I
It's
mean,
just
do we go that route, or do we go, because we could also go like a kinetic route with the dancing and the tango.
I think either way, it's very of the body, right? Like we're talking about it as being a very tactile thing to experience. And I think when you have a multitude of practices, you can use a thing for more things. It's centered in the body. You can use it to heal or, whatever. And then as it gets codified and sort of focused, it's really only used for like industrial productive purposes. And so maybe some of the like elements of it for healing, for,
Yeah.
communicating with the
Maybe
dead.
we flip this, and it's usually maybe it's not the necromancy that gets banned this time. It's the healing.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you can bring people back, you have more workers.
Exactly.
Uh, you
Post capitalism.
man. Yeah, we are really sort of having a very meta game about
Yeah.
capitalism right now.
Because this is, or one option that came to mind for me is like, is one of the ways you do magic, either the codified way or the uncodified way, is that then connected to the dancing? Like, do you have like basically industrial magic that is just pairs or groups of people dancing the same thing over and over and over again because it's been systematized?
Is it square
Yeah.
dancing with a collar?
Mm.
But yeah, ritual that has become commercialized. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then we can also have um, non-orthodox magic practice that is social dancing, that is more improvisational and less structured.
And that gives you underground nightclubs,
Yes.
which every fantasy role playing game needs underground nightclubs. So
Um, I feel like
You know, my
Marianne, like just adding underground nightclubs has got me to the point where like, cool, I can write a short story in this setting now.
and my brain is just immediately going like, okay, but where are the what about the monsters? What about the
Right.
natural world? What about this this kind of magic has to spin
I
out.
I like I always have such a problem with worlds that position us in opposition to monsters, really. Like
Oh no,
going back to your painting, right? Like I think that in the back in the day, like the early Tallow Queen day, right? Like that would have been um where your painting was from. Like that integration of the monstrous and the mundane all together, right? But I don't think monsters are very good at codified dancing in a factory, and it's really breaking that relationship apart, right?
yeah,
When you are I don't even know if you are outlying, but when you are like clearly positioning this is the superior way of interacting with magic, then hanging out and reading a book while you pet a monster, like that suddenly becomes like
yeah.
not
No, no,
what.
I wasn't meaning monsters in like the monstrous way, but like the beasts of the natural world. Like
Yeah.
essentially, like what you're saying, as I agree. Like if that if that domesticated relationship breaks down over time from the Talaquen era to the present, like what happens when you cease to support a domesticated relationship with these beasts, monsters, whatever we're going to call them, these candle creatures.
Oh, I like that a lot.
um and you know what this change has to have a environmental impact too, that these
Mhm.
creatures are turned loose and they're still bred and trained to seek companionship with the people that have now turned them out. um
Yeah, because
I'm thinking of I like the Island of Dogs and
I was thinking about pigeons.
oh
right.
pigeons.
I have
'Cause
pigeons,
to
y'all.
to go back a little bit, uh, AJ, when you're describing kind of that breakthrough and breakdown, I was thinking like, oh, did the category monster come into existence as the delineation between useful creatures and non-useful creatures? Like,
Mm-hmm.
animals are the creatures that fit within this new systematized world, and monsters are the ones that don't. And
Yeah.
can we fold that into what you've already established? How do we feel about that?
Yeah, but I'm still like, but then on the other hand, like I think that any world, I still, as an animal lover, I still have a hard time seeing a world where like people are still not going to want to like have pets of some kind. That there's still
Sure.
going to be some kind of domesticated. But how so? How does that change? How does it change from our Pookie picture to present?
Yeah, because we like maybe the set of animals that are kind of like companion species, like where we have a symbiotic relationship, that set was larger and has become smaller, and the
Yes,
animals that have been left out of it do then they get labeled as monstered, as monstrous, and so the
yes, they have to
monstrousness
be lapdog sized now.
is monstrousness is failing to conform to industry. And
Yeah.
then we get into some of the ways that monstrousness is politicized and reclaimed.
I was gonna say, AJ, it's also it's the breeding of like genteel lap monsters and like purse monsters and
I
that
think
sort
that
of thing.
artist has a painting for that too.
Yes. Yeah, they do. I love that one. I think it's control, right? Is really what it comes down to. It's what the monsters that we can control in very specific ways are animals, and the ones that we cannot control are monsters.
Okay. Um, we're probably at about a good place to take a break. Does anybody want to add anything to like animals real quick before we go to break? Because
Well,
I'm
in a high
excited.
necromancy world, you never lose Pookie.
You never lose Pookie if Pookie is your pet, but we haven't talked about like livestock and animal husbandry animals.
Ooh,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Stay
Yeah.
tuned.
So I think we're going to take a quick break here. I'm going to find La Comparsita. Nope, not yet. That's it's in the wrong window, so I can't do that just yet. Uh, so we're going to go on break for a few minutes. If you are watching on Twitch or YouTube, your break will be as long as our break. A thing we say on this channel is that a break for us is a break for you. And so, folks that are watching or listening, I would encourage you to take this time to take care of yourself, whether that is use the restroom, move around, get a beverage, get a snack, and come back and join us for more of A Land Once Magic. Hello, everyone. We are back with more of our game of A Land Once Magic in our world that is candlelit, hallowed, haunted, and coarse, with our touchstones of an Omar Ryan painting called Pookie, the emergence of life from decay and decay from life, and the iconic Argentine tango song La Comparsita. And we have talked through a legend of a unbeatable monarch and her foundational morality, and the legend warping giving rise to industry. We talked about magic in this setting and differentiations or delineations between animals and monstrous creatures, and things about darkness and ritual. So lots of cool stuff with this game, giving us a bunch to work with. And next, I think we should jump to, looks like this is page 4 in the book. Take turns drawing a card and comparing it to the table. Answer the question, elaborate as needed, but keep it short. Feel free to ask further questions or ask permission to pitch ideas. Each player should answer 2 questions or a total of 6 questions. Decide if you want to draw more or move on. If a card is drawn but that question has already been answered, answer the corresponding question on the magic table, which is a couple of pages down. So do we want to do these one at a time or draw them in sets of 3 or something else?
Should we try one at a time?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Cool. Marianne, can you get us one more card?
I absolutely can. I am prepared. It is the Ace of Hearts, which is another New Hope movie poster.
Woohoo.
Okay. So Ace of Hearts. Ace is odd. What do you mean?
Aces are odd, yeah.
Okay, so Ace of Hearts, I guess that is what relics remain of the common ancestry between all people, as I'm reading it. So who wants to take that one? Or does anybody have a thought?
I just have a thought that I want to introduce because I kept looking up AJ trying to find an answer to your question about like the general category of candles that you use to light other candles. And I did not find the answer to that, but I found spiral candles, which have 2 wicks and one burns down into the well and lights the wick of the other one, and then the other spiral burns.
Oh, yeah, I think I've seen those, but never lit.
And I was like, that's so freaking cool. And also kind of thematically fits. So I just want to throw that spiral candle like into the mix of, I guess, our culture for this world.
Yeah.
Oh, that could be like, what if there's like a twin legend to the Tallow Queen, that at the end of the era, when the spiral has reached its nadir, there will be a rise of another Tallow Queen.
And something Widdershins is in there as well.
Widdershins, yes.
Going in the opposite direction.
Equal in power, yet opposite in nature. Yes. It could be fun. I don't know if maybe there's a relic that. What relics remain of the common ancestry between all? We haven't really talked about like differing peoples in this world yet.
Yeah, like, was the Tallow Queen the queen of all peoples, and there were like subgroups,
and then there was a split in the division? Was that division along the magic lines we talked earlier between the kinetics and the like necromancy and life folks? Was that like a split? Or was it a split more between like the ritualistic magic of the dance versus the like folk, not gritty, what word, a coarse magic style? I mean, what was the split? What would have caused a schism in this world?
Yeah. Are there people who didn't want to kind of push away some of the creatures, and then so they were pushed away with them?
There's like a Beastmaster Island in this world. I love it. It's very anime.
I I think you do have people who respond to this in different ways, and that causes not like a binary schism, but like a lot of fracturing.
Mm.
And I think that culturally, in a lot of cases, the stuff that winds up being kind of terrible, is sold to us as it's a convenience, or it's for, it does actually accomplish good things. And then we just sort of take that for granted, and we don't look at all of the like the flow through, right? So I feel like the people who sort of industrialized magic were not necessarily like evil robber baron capitalists. I think that they were probably people who were trying to solve problems, and they were like, this is the way we think this problem should be solved. And I think there were probably other groups who were like, we should not solve that problem that way. And you wind up with a Beastmaster Island, and you wind up with, encampments. Maybe you wind up with encampments that are like people who are only awake at night, who have like flopped their schedules, in some kind of like ritualistic embracing of the thing they see the capitalists as warding off.
Mm.
And you get more of that like differentiation as time goes on.
Another way to look at this is not what causes a schism between, but like what progress in the world, what changes leave certain people behind. Because
Yeah.
anything we see as progress and change in our societies always ostracizes a certain portion of the population, will always leave behind people. What about people that could not give up their large monsters or candle creatures because it helped them with labor, or they had a disability that they helped them with?
Right.
I was thinking about that with like magic being very centered in the body and very tactile. Like the industrialization of magic, the way we have talked about it, has absolutely sort of painted very fit, able-bodied people who can dance for a long time as the most productive and magical people in society.
Right.
Yeah, and especially in a world that is decentralizing healing magic and increasing necromancy magic, and focusing on the ability to produce kinetic based kind of physicality of magic. That's an incredibly ableist centered world.
That gets rough. We should probably draw another card, because I think I greatly believe in our ability to go for a long time on any given thing, so I'm going to try to keep us moving.
All right.
This is the Two of Hearts. It's another New Hope poster.
Okay. So
we have no Return of the Jedi things yet, but
so I guess even is the
even
land.
Heart. Yeah.
What anomalies in this world are used as landmarks? How old are they? Oh, this is interesting. This is definitely a different dimension than we've been focusing on.
Yeah.
What in what ways is the land or the world coarse? Or is it about, or are there landmarks that are hallowed and haunted? Are the places where I go first?
For some reason, I want to say giant bones.
Love some giant bones.
My very first thought was like megaflora and megafauna. Absolutely.
Yeah. This world is magic that is, gritty and visceral and kinetic. It's very much in the land itself, and it's also a world where magic's being used a lot in the necromantic sense of being constantly, not allowing stuff to decay perhaps as it should. So it the further out you go from civilization, perhaps the things that shape the landscape are these giant creatures that were not brought back by necromantic means
Hmm.
and were actually allowed to lay where they fell. And these giant bones, perhaps they're like some pack animals that die, go to one place to die, and there's these giant boneyards that, eventually over time maybe get covered with greenery and land and so forth. But it's these giant bones that shape the landscapes of certain areas.
And I think maybe it's regional.
Okay.
So, like, some places have these giant bones, and some places have giant tree roots and plant roots and nurse
Coral.
logs. And I think the thing that these places have in common is that these are the hallowed spaces, right? Because these are the places where people used to practice the less codified, more folkloric, like more improvisational style of magic, right? Like in these very like connected to the natural like cycles of things places.
Now, are these the hallowed places or the haunted places?
I think they're both. I think that the hallowed places are now haunted. Like I think they probably used to just be hallowed and now they are also haunted.
Right.
See, I was seeing it more as a tension of like something is haunted when there's like a high magic activity, and then it like as things fade and settle, it becomes hallowed. But you're saying it's like the opposite way.
I was thinking that like yeah, I guess I was thinking about it the opposite way, right? That like these places that were very connected to the cycle were the most magical places. And now all of that magic has faded. And really what you're getting when you go there is no longer, that sense of magic, but you're getting like the haunted, um, the ghosts of the magic that used to be there.
Interesting.
Very cool. Let's do another card.
Okay. Now we have the Ten of Hearts, and that's another New Hope poster.
That's going to be another even heart one.
Yep.
Yes, so that means if a card is drawn, answer the corresponding question on the magic table, and so that was a 10. Can you separate magic from religion or cultural identity? So we've talked a little bit about some of this stuff already. I'm curious where we would want to build here. Is like, has magic been separated in that it's been universalized, right? If there were like regional practices, but then there was an orthodoxy that was pushed out from the center.
I was thinking about your comment earlier about how like when you move away from a place, like you more strongly identify with where you're from, basically. And this feels like it ties into that too, right? Like when magic was less codified, there were regional practices, but they were just regional practices and they were maybe less emphatic.
Hmm.
But as it was industrialized, I think the people who held on to those like metaphorical regional identities probably really held on to those regional identities, which may have further created like some schisms, right?
Cool.
But AJ, what do you think?
All I can think is I want to like veer away from the because we have like tango and rotten decay and we have bones now and we have necromancy, and I just like I impulsively want to veer away from like the whole like Catholic overtones of like bone
Sure.
cathedrals and
Yeah.
stuff, just out of pure spite, out of pure
I
writer
was
spite.
not even thinking about bone cathedrals, and now I'm thinking about bone cathedrals.
And we can have bone cathedrals, but let's not make them cathedrals.
Yeah.
Let's like, make them something else.
Yeah, like
Um,
because instead of bone cathedrals, do we have like bone raiment, and bone, um, like ritual implements? So the kind of the canonized, like the official priest has like, okay, cool, here's my scepter that's made out of a spine, and like, because you can go from architecture into like implements, or we go some other
it's
way.
true. This is probably just a personal taste of mine. Large organized religion on a large scale. I love making more religions that are more like regional. I love making the smaller the religion possible in fantasy settings, the more interesting they are to me,
Right.
because it makes it more personal. Like
Yeah.
the thing I think I've been working on my back pocket for a while. I just need to convince a publisher to let me write it and publish it. Is this small gods fantasy world
Mm.
where all the big gods obliterated themselves in this war with each other, and all that's left is these itty bitty little shrine gods
Okay.
that hold the world together in a patchwork.
Cool.
And that's the kind of like but I
I
think
think it's interesting that the assumption is that like it is a big like religion like Catholicism, because I was not applying religion to this, right? Like I am still very stuck on industry. And I was
Mhm.
thinking about how mass production and a factory setting, like maybe you have a poster of a boneyard, but really what you have is the most efficient process possible. So you are divorcing the practice of magic from whatever it used to mean to all of these different people,
Right.
because now what it means is whatever the focus of this industry is.
Right. Like, has sacrality actually fallen out of or been pushed out of
yeah.
industry? And so we've cycled around to regional, local, folk religious
Yeah.
activity where,
Or
go ahead.
I'll say, or it's become more of the comforting folk charms and folk rituals that, you buy a bone charm when you go home to visit your parents, but you don't go to the temple or whatever. That's not what you do anymore. It's the religion, the belief is in the practices, the small practices, not the
Mm.
organized religion. Is that kind of like what people are getting at?
That's
Yeah.
that's sort of what I was talking about. Yeah, where the like the whole idea of the production of magic has been like I guess desanctified and
Mm-hmm.
unconsecrated.
Right.
Um, because it wasn't ever like a consecrated thing before if it was just like a natural thing, right? Like now now we are seeing the separation of those worlds
Right.
Mm-hmm.
as we develop this. So
Yeah. And I feel like that kind of gets us away from big, big church Catholicism type stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Cool.
because like in the world we create, there's really no need for like a gatekeeper type figure with the magic.
Yeah. I feel like I, I can imagine like an industrial patent cop more than I can like an inquisition.
Yeah.
because of the character I play in our other game, I think a lot about this kind of thing, right? And what it looks like when corporate interests and corporations replace government
Right.
and support networks and social structure and that sort of thing. And a lot of what it looks like is company towns.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of what we're talking about here too, right? Where it's all every aspect of the lives of the people are dedicated to whatever this industry is and removed from, whatever sphere it used to belong to.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Shall we go on to another card?
Yes.
I want to get a face card for magic that was in this
I do
section.
too, but what I got was the 4 of diamonds.
Okay. So 4 of diamonds. Looks like that is, what is the common transportation method that caravans utilize? So like, do we have like?
I mean, like in the Talaqueen era, it would be these giant, awesome candle creatures.
Yeah.
I think pulling things and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think those would probably have fallen out of fashion.
AJ, are these caravans pulled by the reanimated dead now?
Mm.
Powered by the industrialized magic?
So like reanimated humans.
Yeah.
Okay. How
or
is
just
that?
zombie oxen.
Right. Like, and because we have the opportunity to not, or like, how is that considered culturally? Is that just normal? Are those considered the same people anymore? Is it like, oh well, my grandfather still pulls our cart since he died 20 years ago, or are they just depersonalized?
When you put it like my grandfather still pulls our cart and he died 20 years ago, that's actually kind of sweet and like a nice way to stay connected to your like people who have passed on.
Right.
And I don't know that this is that sweet a world.
I mean, it could be as simple as, I mean, we say zombies, but it doesn't have to be zombie rules. Like
Yeah.
the actual person's in the head, and so they remove the head and bury it, and then the rest of the body is animated, and then the body is, does whatever work, and it may not even be like stay in the family. It goes to, I think there was a meme I saw, like there was a meme that went around of like your body being reanimated and going to the government after you die or something. But something like that where
There is something
there is a
delicious.
portion of the body that is considered the person, and that portion of the body, I would argue the head or something like that, would be removed and sanctified, and then the rest of the body is just.
My other thought was that we used to have these giant candle creatures pulling these caravans, and those are the specific candle creatures that were reanimated. So the sort of like living version of those creatures are not valued, are feared, are not, something we consider controllable at this point. But we have this like finite resource of the mega oxen that used to pull it, and they still do.
So
Just
like,
say that makes it a finite resource, which makes it dwindling and valuable.
right, because then you could have a cultural movement where it's like, okay, this ranching company is lobbying really hard to get this type of creature like revalidated, because then they would have access to this incredible like capital resource, right? Of like, well, I have 30 more candle brachiosauruses, and if I can get those approved, now I have a whole fleet, like a whole caravan fleet. And so there'd be like a lot of like, is it politicking? Is it like getting licenses? Is it about like a cultural fight of like, no, this is cool, like of changing social mores, like mores?
Yeah, making them seem docile or palatable to the upper crust or any number of things.
And then you do have that political fight of, is it okay to use live candle brachiosauruses, or do we only use reanimated brachiosauruses? So even if you have a herd of 30 of them, now like we're only going to use them if they're reanimated.
Right. Yeah, or is there something about the air that age that is valued. It's like, oh well, they're not what they used to be in like a
Exactly.
in like a completely like fabricated fashion of like, you know, there hasn't been evolution to make them like notably a different creature in any meaningful fashion. There is just this, you know, okay, this part of history is venerated in some
Yeah.
weird, in some way.
Scarcity, a scarcity snobbery, you know, like,
Right.
oh, it's
Is that some way in which change is fought against, right? Like, oh, okay, do we have merchant families that just conveniently have all of these animated candle creatures? And they said, cool, yeah, no more, because that benefits them. Of like, oh, strangely, the cutoff just happens to benefit me.
mhm.
Very cool. Uh, that one card instantly gives me so much more like juice, which is fantastic. So they say a total of 6, so we can
We've
probably
got 4.
4. Okay. Yeah. What do we got
And the
next?
next card is your face card. This is the Queen of Spades, Revenge of the Sith.
Queen of Spades. Okay. What toll did magic take to cast? What has recovered since it was locked? And so in this set of prompts, there is the idea that magic was locked at some point, and that's kind of why we're post fantasy. I don't know that we necessarily want to lean into that, but we could reinterpret locked. So like the first thing that comes to mind is like, is using magic, does that burn some candle, literally or metaphorically? Like, are you burning the candle of your life? Are you burning some resource? Like, oh, okay, well, we make candles out of X, and different types of magic use different types of candles if we want to go really that direction, or something. Because, like, you could do sympathetic magic of, like, oh, well, I put a candle on this rock so that I can do magic that impacts the rock.
I mean, did mention that candles can be made out of like animal fat and stuff. That
Right.
plays into the whole necromancy and things. If you
Mm-hmm.
need certain animals or humans' fat for certain magics. But I mean, it's like we've emphasized that the magic of this world is like kinetic and coarse
Mm-hmm.
and in the body. So it definitely has. I feel like the easy answer is that it has a life force, energy, whatever kind of cost. Even if it's just, exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I think that one of the arguments that was probably made around the codification of magic is that it's safer now.
Sure.
And I think that sort of improvisational, like more, I don't know, home remedy magic, like there's the cost of the exhaustion, but there's also maybe the idea that like the more outlandish a feat you perform, the stronger the magic will be. And so people make some questionable choices and, just actually get in like completely non-magical accidents around it as well. There's probably that life force question that AJ brought up like as well. So it's like a double whammy.
Mm. So is that like, to try to connect things, do you, in that system, do you then get like really acrobatic and athletic dances as part of magic? Like, is that how the kind of dangerous or
I don't
outlandishness?
like it because it's again it's veering so ableist.
Hmm.
I don't like. I think, what if the magic, the 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 kinetic tie, the coarseness of the magic is tied in. So we have a coarse kinetic kind of magic. We have a very active folkloric magic community during the time of the Tallow Queen. And we have the use of candles all wrapped up into this. What if the reason that folkloric magic is kind of codified out after the Tallow Queen is because folkloric magic actually was able to subvert and avoid the whole like kinetic cost because it actually underlined that the magic was tied to I want to say like I want to bring in like the nature, like the freshness of ingredients, the ability to like you know how when you go visit a friend that lives at a farm and they cook you a meal that has ingredients that they just went out and picked from their garden and it tastes way better,
Right.
like that, but magic. And maybe maybe that was a shortcut that the folklore magic had that threatened the folks in the cities, and so like the codification and moving away and the obscuring of the Tallow Queen was part of that,
Right.
and is another avenue of magic, so it doesn't make it quite so like essentially ableist that the only way to generate these highly powerful magics is by kinetic physicality.
Right. So
Well, I don't think that it's the only way. I think that's the thing about the folkloric magic, right? And then
Uh-huh.
the thing about like the industrialized magic is that it is codified as like this is the way we've made it safe, this is the most efficient way, like whether it is or not, right? And I think
Yeah.
that there's lots of different avenues for that in folkloric stuff, whether it's somebody has particularly good ingredients or like somebody is actually drawing the energy for their magic from the strength of their community that they have like built and worked towards.
Yeah.
I think that there's like so much room for lots of different sources depending on the kind of person that each person is, like it's really individualized as opposed to like the mass produced magic basically.
Yeah.
right.
What
Because
if like the codification part of the codification is it's seen as, unvirtuous to not produce your magic with your own body or whatever. And
oh
so
sure.
they've codified these other things that are like perceived seen as like wild magics that, everyone else has been using for hundreds of years and is completely even more efficient than what has been commercialized and codified as the safer, more clean way of doing magic.
Yeah. Because if because
The colonized way of doing magic, if
right.
you
Because
will.
I'm thinking like okay, if I use D&D terms here, so it's like at some point or for some chunk of time, material components were really really highly valued, and so like the quality of okay, this leaf from this tree out by like the gigantic tree, we do the magic with that, and we have specific location and community aspects, and so those factors were prioritized at least in some regional styles, and then in a more potentially more urbanized magic, material components have to be more standardized for like shipping and things like that. So you almost have farm to table magic and then like industrial farming magic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like all of the different farming styles in between, because I think that, yeah, I'm gonna sit on that rant. But like the individualization. And so that introduces, like, not even according to this chart, that introduces to me the sort of like question of in this society, do we see the same thing we see now, right? Where the ultra rich are having their bespoke individual magic experiences, and you know it's cool to pay $8 for truffle three cheese grits for them, but it's not cool to have like you know your grits in a trailer or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see that same sort of side effect where the production of magic gets that almost, what's the opposite, like the opposite of a bear bell curve, where like the high value is either this or that. I don't know. I forget all the names of my curves.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
that points in some cool ways. Let's do our 6th card, and then we may be able to build that into this next section.
Our 6th card is the Jack of Diamonds.
Okay, so the Jack of Diamonds, going back here, looks like, what artifacts does magic linger in? How does it manifest, and can it be lost? Because we had a little bit about relics earlier. Artifacts could be similar or not.
I mean, maybe this is where those spiral candles come in.
Yeah, I think if we're doing candles, like, there's got to be something about candles, the way they can capture magic.
Yeah.
So is it like the fat? Like, are the candles necessarily made from, like, fats and, you know, formerly living materials? Is there no soy candles in this world?
Is that why we call them candle creatures?
Oh no! No! I veto that.
I'm glad. I'm like, no, this is terrible. But I have to say it.
Necromancy, chopping off relatives' heads before you zombify them, yes.
Fine.
Making candles out of pookie, no.
No.
But otherwise, like, I think it has to be. It feels to me that if magic is this visceral and like coarse, it has to wear in the grooves and ruts of things easily. I think places has to accumulate magic. Like this places where these rituals and dances are taking place. I think that almost becomes a problem. Like they have to like scrub the places, elsewise the wild magic would cause problems for especially the commercialized.
Right. Mm-hmm. Does that then create gentrification cycles where you do magic in a place and then it reaches the point where it's dangerous and it becomes low-end housing? Yeah. And then that dissipates over time and it becomes more valuable and it gets gentrified and people do more magic there.
Again, what are the mushrooms of this magic accumulation or decline?
Yeah.
What grows where there's too much or too little magic?
I think that's where we get into how does it manifest and can it be lost, right?
Yeah.
Like there's this Ford factory, we'll say, right? Like the Ford industrial factory for magic. And part of scrubbing it is cleaning out like the growths. And eventually the growths spread too quickly, like kudzu, and can't be ripped out. And that's sort of the moment, right, when you lose that factory, where there's a tipping point and you're sort of constantly battling against the magic that's settling into like the rebar and the I-beams and whatever else that's been used to construct it.
What's that stuff called?
We got to go back. I think the word we haven't used much of is haunted for that. This is what haunts the world. What is the growth, the haunt? Is it like something? I keep thinking of the memory pearls from our game.
Yeah, is it something orthogonal to all the other stuff we've talked about? Is it like, is this something that's more like cosmic horror-y or mythos-y, like that's totally other and not necessarily in the total combination of the way that mythos stuff operates, but like, is it extra dimensional in some fashion? Like, oh, okay, does magic tap into some other place and then there's like a breach in the veil in the way of like, I guess, ooze, like the ooze or the goop in the Ghostbusters movies?
I like the goop more than like cosmic horror, because if we're going with a magic that's very coarse and ingrained in the world, then I would think that the excess or buildup of that would also have to be like maybe like a primal ooze or like crystals, maybe like
Hmm.
faceted growths.
I
I
was
keep
thinking like barnacles. I don't know that we have to
barnacles
Barnacle.
do
really freaking
barnacles, but I like because barnacles are
cool.
coarse.
Mm-hmm. Coral, some kind of
Oh yeah,
coral growth.
I keep
Those
coming
look.
back to kudzu and how quickly it spreads and how like impossible it is to eradicate certain vining plants. And what if it, I mean, because it's not like we have to stick to a plant that we know, but what if it is something that has like those characteristics and that like covering capability, right? Where it
Yeah.
blankets a thing, but it has more of the like animal nature of the barnacle. Like when barnacles are open, that looks strange and amazing because they're creatures, right? So what if it is like, and the way we think about mushrooms as like little individual things, but really they're like a huge connected organism. So what if the the thing that haunts is that huge connected organism, and what we get are these manifestations of it in these like blanketed, like weird corally shaped barnacle animal like things that
right.
people aren't like sure if it's a plant or an animal or what exactly it is, but
Right.
it's still very much a part of the natural world. It's just weird.
So if barnacles were a fungus, and then like the fruiting bodies are the ghosts.
Yeah, they just occasionally develop like an eye or a beak or something, random places. No one knows
Um,
why. And they're like nearly indestructible too. Like you
so
can't burn them, you can't
yeah,
crush them.
I want us to come up with a name for this because I feel like that if I were going to go do something with this, having that name is really important.
I want to say like
um
something. What's the cat? What's the when you cast something, the melt off or the cast off? I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too much on it.
I really like the term fruiting bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can incorporate something from like this waxy candle like situation
Right.
into fruiting bodies, I think that'd be really cool.
So I am Googling wax terminology. What are 5 characteristics of wax?
Candling terminology.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, but not like ear candling terminology.
Uh,
Exclude.
Um,
Glossary of candle terms for candle making. This is what writers do.
uh-huh. This is, yeah, 100%. Burn rate, chatter
Chatter
marks.
marks.
Yep. I'm going to go to a different page so that I'm not just repeating the same things that you have.
Um, Excess melted wax running down the outside is called a
Model.
gutter.
Ooh.
It's called what?
A gutter.
Hmm.
We have jump lines. Um, Mushrooming is a candle term.
I think
Mm-hmm.
gutter is funny because when I hear gutter, I think
Gutterwicks.
like guttering in a comic book, but the idea that the gutter fills and flows is like
And
it's
overflow.
dissonant in an interesting way.
Yeah. I kind of like gutter wicks.
I
Like
like Gutterwicks.
And so is our gutter
it's
wicks
gross.
the fruiting, and then gutter is the thing overall, or is it all gutter wicks?
I think Gutterwicks are the barnacles. Yeah, they're all the
Yeah.
barnacle. It's a Gutterwick infestation.
Yeah.
Goddamn Gutterwicks.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's rad.
You can curse it really effectively. Yeah.
Gutterwicks.
Overall thing. Okay, so gutter is the overall thing, and then gutter wicks are the
Yeah.
like barnacle fruiting body.
Do people who are super invested in industrialized magic call people who stick to more like localized regional folkloric magic Gutterwicks as like an insult.
It could be an insult. Are Gutterwicks something that can grow on a human if they accumulate too much magic?
That's where like someone writes a short story.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like because
Start a barnacles to eye.
Mm-hmm.
because you could like this is also kind of still going into that horror place, which is fine, but are there places where up to a point it's fashionable because it shows that you're a magician, and so that you
So a
have
little bit of scaling is okay, but if it gets barnacly, it's yes.
um, this is cool and
Is
gross.
that something that the dancers who work in these industrialized factories have to worry about?
Oh yeah, because they're subsumed in it.
Mm-hmm.
They're constantly generating it and they're constantly like marinating in it. So do they have like the equivalent of emergency like chemical exposure showers?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah,
do
is there
they
like sicknesses associated with this? Or
Right.
is there like a superstitions about a sickness, but it actually is harmless kind
Right,
of
like
thing, you know?
there is no black lung for industrial magic workers,
Mm.
but there's like superstition about it, or
Yeah, or it's just it's so um not appealing to society at large that any sign of Gutterwick or this kind of over influence of magic is so undesirable that it's there's room it's treated like an illness or a disease even if
right.
it's
is there an entire like beauty spa industry that has grown up around removing barnacle
yeah
like
Gutterwick scars.
Yep.
and Gutterwick scars? Yeah.
Very cool. All
What an
right.
awful world we've made
I
together,
know,
guys.
right?
This is delightful.
It's awful, but there's also parts that could be very cool. It's not
Mm-hmm.
to me. It's not like 100% bad top to bottom, which means that I can like deal with the badness more. So we've already been talking about cities. We can throw some extra prompts into that. Build a city primer using this table below. Choose whether the city is crumbling or flourishing. Name the city only after answering the respective questions. With the same 3 cards draw, answer the questions in the calendar before moving on. So this is again, looks like it is 3 cards.
Okay.
So we're going to do, I guess, one city. Do we want this city to be crumbling or flourishing?
I think we've talked about crumbling a lot. Should we talk about a flourishing city that's
Yeah.
Okay. Then yeah, let's have another card.
We have the 2 of diamonds.
So 2 of diamonds, looks like we're back to this. So innovation, a nexus of learning and invention. So this city's influence was innovation, a nexus of learning and invention. Just gonna,
Do we want to talk about that or do you want me to draw the next card? Give us the whole like
yeah, let's do all of them.
Okay, this is the 3 of spades. So we have its variant of magic was secretive, feared, or shunned if seen in public.
Interesting. It's variant of magic.
And then another legend was born here. Discuss its title and their current status. It's a crew because this is the 7 of diamonds and it's upside down, but it's the 7 of diamonds. So titled for their reputation or symbols.
Another legend was born here. Just getting all this down.
So we have a flourishing city whose influence was innovation. Its variant of magic was secretive, feared, or shunned. And another legend was born there of a crew. Um, discuss the city's proximity to another landmark.
Yeah, like
What if it was a city that was near one of these boneyards
Yeah, absolutely.
and actually secretly was a place of learning? It was known to be a place of learning, but actually had a flourishing school for healing, which was
Yeah.
its secretive magic. That used not only that experimented not only with working in the power of the bones from the nearby resources, but also the power of the Gutterwicks themselves as a resource.
mm,
Instead of making people sick, do the Gutterwicks actually themselves form sort of a symbiotic relationship with whoever they grow on?
That could be cool, and it's not really well known because people are so, it's such a societal ick that it's removed so quickly. Um,
yeah. And
and this is one of the few places in the world where it's actually secretly being studied, and you know perhaps their studies have been greatly hampered in the recent years. But
cool. Yeah,
is there
Uh,
anything
I'm thinking
is
about
there
like
anything
okay.
I say, is there anything unique about the boneyard it's located next to that it's happened to pop up here as opposed to other places?
Right, is there some species that either came to or already had a symbiotic relationship with the Gutterwicks, and that like relates to or informs why something is different here. Like, oh, okay, well, because there's such like a long, um, like, is there a an ancient Gutterwick colony or gutter colony in or by the boneyard, and it is big enough or old enough or something enough that people related to it different. Like,
I was also
is that where some of the difference comes?
I was also thinking about bees and beeswax and bees hives and like the source of candle wax that we get from beeswax, that sort of thing. And what if this is like what if this is one of those places, right, where there's multiple sources of things, and yeah, there's an established Gutterwick colony because you can't root them out, you can't make them go away,
Mm-hmm.
but what you have now are bees that are like getting pollen from the fruiting bodies of Gutterwicks
Mm.
because they must bloom, and like the candle wax that people are making from the beeswax is like the way you take like you eat local honey to deal with allergies.
Mm.
And I feel like there's something kind of in the like the product there, and the like the connection, because people are still using candles,
Mm-hmm.
and they're still trying to find ways to incorporate that light.
Right. And so, where does our legendary crew come in here? Is it like a legendary crew of beekeepers? Is it a legendary crew of um, like people who were doing something or harvesting something or relating to the boneyard?
Is
I,
it a
I, I
legend?
was about to say librarians, but this is probably because it's me.
Well, I
uh,
was thinking, is it a legendary crew of people who are, you know, people who are covered with Gutterwick?
or yeah, That would be nice. That would be a nice twist on it. Yeah. I was
Um,
gonna say like crew of like doctors or researchers or something, but yeah, maybe there's actually a, because probably people who have too bad an infection and like the have reached that symbiotic point where it can't be removed, but be ostracized from society, and perhaps somewhere near the city, it's become a refuge place for folks with Gutterwick symbiosis. Um, and there was a legendary crew of these people that actually, they did something great, whether they were adventurers or uh,
Gutterwick
did you
superheroes.
ever read the Chronicles?
a great D&D team, guys.
Yeah. But did you ever read the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant?
No.
No,
It,
I just watched that
um,
show.
he's a terrible person, but he's a leper.
Mm.
And so that is sort of woven through the whole series of these books, right? Like he's a leper, he's like stigmatized by society, but also he is doing these things. And it's instead of like one exceptional individual, we have like a crew of these
Right.
people.
I was thinking a different book series. Sorry, I don't think
Yeah.
Thomas Covenant has had a TV show.
I
Um,
think it would be I I don't yeah, I don't know that you could make that TV show.
yeah. Yeah, I was also thinking like the kind of reminded of like the leper colony idea because you have like okay there's a version of like inverting that is like oh well the symbiosis with the Gutterwicks then gives you different magic, better magic, superpowers, insight, or is it like oh okay well if you have a good relationship with your Gutterwicks then you are a community like that symbiosis already lets you reach that level of community, which gives you a certain type of magical potentiality.
Yeah, I almost like the idea of it not being like a magical power, but maybe like makes you healthier, stronger, easier able to fight illnesses, like basic survival stuff. Um, is there
Y'all,
something else?
can you eat Gutterwicks?
I don't think you can,
I
because
don't
I
think
want
you
them to be
can.
kind of like indestructible,
Yeah.
because they're a problem, If you could eat them, they'd end up, bougie gourmet food at some point.
I
Right.
mean, there's a lot of stuff we can eat that we don't because of like weird social stigma stuff. So I was like, can we
Yeah.
eat them?
Or is
I don't
it
know.
like, do people only eat some part of a Gutterwick? It's like, oh, okay, like the equivalent of we only eat the petals. We don't eat the stamen or the stem or anything like that. Um, but was that is all three of those, and then with the same three cards we do the calendar. So
Oh,
calendar, we have a
What's
three.
Gutterwick honey taste like? Sorry.
Ooh,
no, that's a
um,
good question. Salty for sure.
let's see. So we had a 3, a 7, and
A two.
a 2. Okay. So I'm just going to go down here. 2. How do the celestial bodies play in tracking the year? Um, where do the names of the months or equivalents come from? And that was a 3 is the other one.
Yeah.
What is used to track the passage of time? How is it represented visually? These
I
would
mean,
be
we have,
Well, I was gonna say candles already do that.
and like candles are a timekeeping device
yeah.
already. So maybe we track the passage of time by candle, but the like the 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 um the segments that time is broken into are tied to different things, right? Like instead of the movement of the sun, it is some entirely different celestial body.
Yeah. Let's see, where do the names for the months equivalent come from? Could that be like the months are different ingredients that we make candles out of?
Paraffin. Um,
Are the months sort of tied to some kind of cycle that the people are otherwise experiencing, right? Like not necessarily ingredients, but something cyclic. Um, like now it's gods and numbers, but what if it were more sort of tied to like a harvest and planting and death cycle?
Right, like because you could have like, okay, well, spring um, is it's something, it's some kind of dying, some kind of birth, some kind of growth, some kind of dying, some kind of like. It makes me think of the like Facebook or Tumblr or whatever memes of like, uh, well, you get 4 winters, right? Because it's like first winter, and then like you get another autumn, and then you get this winter, and like is that sick? Do we like have an analog to that cyclicality that goes into months or something or seasons?
well, and also we could make it dance terms too, because we
Oh
have
yeah.
these ritual dances
Mm.
going on.
Do the ritual dances, like the old ritual dances, do they have their roots in some kind of ritual that acknowledges like that cycle of seasons and life and death and growing
Right.
and decay and that sort of thing?
Right. Where in uh, at the last harvest we dance, insert name of dance here,
Yeah.
because that is the it's what the everybody dances this together thing turned into. Like the
Hmm.
basically the circle dance turns into like partner or quartet dance.
I
I think
mean, you
that's
could
cool.
have like the whole like allegro, adagio, or not a dancer.
Yeah.
Part of being a writer is like being not a lot of things, but knowing just a little enough to get your research started.
Right, because it's like, is is the word for the first year in the month some play on the idea of like an overture?
Yeah.
Or is it some play on the word for like whatever the first measure of music is called?
Hmm.
Or when like a conductor raises their baton, what is that called? I don't know.
Right.
But is it something that signifies the beginning of a dance? And then the like rest of it is the various parts of a dance
Right.
and the tempos at which they are danced. And then, coming to the end of the cycle of the dance and moving on to the next dance.
Right. Okay. That is very cool. I think we are at a good place to take our second break, and then we will come back for what is our last section? Journey in the Land. And I guess we get through Journey in the Land, and then we just vibe and talk until we feel like we're done. So we will take a quick break. This is a reminder to you to take a break in whatever way is good for you, whether that is get a beverage, drink a beverage, use the restroom, check in with people, move around, whatever. And we will be back with the third part of our game of A Land Wants Magic. Thanks. See you in a minute. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Speculate one-shot of A Land Once Magic, which is a very cool post-fantasy world-building game that we've been making goth AF and doing lots of cool stuff with candles. So we have two things to catch up on, which folks pointed out to me. We need to name our flourishing gutter-positive city, and we have to give our crew a title or it's like a status, like what they're up to now, because then the last kind of formal step is we're going to describe people traveling to this city that we've built and then like following their story there. So does anybody have an idea for this flourishing city, for its name?
I don't have an idea for the flourishing city's name, but I do have kind of a question for both of you, based on what you were just saying, Mike, which is that this is a post-fantasy game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really just a thing that is interesting to me that, like, we have not erased magic from our post-fantasy game world.
Mm-hmm.
It's this sort of I don't know, the like the rules and requirements have all changed, but it is still very much a magic world, which I think is really interesting.
We've corrupted magic.
Yeah.
If that is the way we've taken it, we've made it awful.
Yeah, because
We keep talking about magic fading, but like, does that even look like? Have we really actually done that, or have we just made it capitalist? I mean, capitalism is always the bad guy. I mean,
yeah, because
I had kind of thought that the fading is that, and we touched on it, right, when we were talking about like the mega flora and the giant bones, that like the magic produced in a factory setting can't like equal a factory farm tomato will never be as delicious as a homegrown tomato.
yeah. So it's not so much like the world's fading; it's the self-imposed fading of magic by this codification and commercialization.
right, because um, I guess it's more like we have a setting that has moved from fairy tale or like traditional fantasy into like almost like Arthurian fantasy, maybe into something that's like industrial fantasy.
Yeah, almost like fantasy has taken the role of nature here, and like the world has moved from being away from being in balance with it to being imbalanced with it, and that's what's causing the problems.
Right, and we have this thing that is a byproduct or is a part of the cycle that the cycle of the use of magic and how magic interacts with the world, where part of the cycle has been demonized largely, and people are trying to cut it out, like cut out part of a cycle of life.
Yeah. So how does that feed into the way cities are named?
Right. Is this like
I mean, if the idea of this place being a refuge for the Gutterwick symbiotes was positive, it would have like Haven or something in name. But
right?
in this world, it's not positive.
Yeah.
So, what is the reverse on that?
Right. Or and like does it have multiple names? Is it
Yeah.
both Bonehaven and Guttertown?
Yeah.
I like the dual names a lot. And all of that is better than naming it like, I don't know, some person's name with Berg stuck on the end. Nothing against any real world Bergs. They're lovely.
Yeah.
The like it's the two sides of the coin, right? Like the
Right.
two ends of the candle. The twin wicks. So like what's a growth of barnacles called?
Cluster, maybe?
Let's
To
see.
the internet.
Yep. Da-da-da-da. I apologize if you are watching or listening to this and shouting at a screen and or your podcatcher because you know this term.
If you know this term, you're very cool, and I appreciate you. The collective noun for barnacles.
Foodrepublic.com claims barnacles are edible and delicious.
Larval form of the barnacle is called a nopolis.
What I found is incrustation as the collective noun for barnacle colonies.
Interesting. Let's see. Because the other thing we could do is we could go off of like scientific names. So thyro.
Crust end.
Oh, crust end.
Crust end. So is that the name the people of the city have given it, or is that the derogatory name?
That's the derogatory name, crust end.
Because that is how they describe, like, oh, they have crust ends.
Yeah.
Yes. There's all sorts of horrible
So is that
ways to play with that.
Is that crust end two word or two words that have been smushed into one? Is it crust end or crustend?
I think it sounds snobbier the second way.
It does sound snobbier the second way.
And then what is the name the people of the city use for this place? We had talked about like haven or some variation on that.
It's weird, but I'm finding the word for the larval form of barnacle is called nopolis, and it sounds a little bit like Nopolis.
Okay.
Like polis is in city.
Is that how is that spelled?
N-A-U. The word for the larval stage is N-A-U-P-L-I-U-S. P-L-I-U-S, yes. But you could also play with that and make it fantasy by making it P-O-L-I-S for like polis is in city.
Right.
Yeah.
Nopolis.
So that's N-A-U-P-O-L-I-S if we're doing that.
Yeah. I made it.
I like it because it's kind of coded.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if you have a city that is kind of a haven for people encrusted with Gutterwicks, you don't necessarily want to advertise that to the wrong people. You want to protect that and make sure only the people who need to know.
Right. Okay.
Like Nopolis is the ultimate if you know, you know.
Yeah. So that, or does that then give us any ideas for a name for the crew who like worked with the refugees or worked with the kind of Gutterwick kind of outside colony? Or did that outside colony get folded into the city, or did that colony become the city?
Oh, are we talking about our Gutterwick symbiote crew?
Yeah.
And I feel like they would kind of embrace the crusty end joke somehow.
Yeah.
Make it their own.
Also, as far as where that Gutterwick colony is, it's the classic fantasy trope, right? It's under the city.
Amid the boneyard.
It's somebody built a city on a boneyard, and now like all of the foundations of the city.
Yes, it's like the typical necropolis, but it's like not even like mausoleum. It's just the bones themselves are the structure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I do think they would embrace that crust end situation and
the enders.
I'm like thinking of lots of bread words.
Right. So the crust end, they're positive about Gutterwicks.
Like I really want toast now.
Tenders.
Like, are they
the tender ends?
Because I like two or three mental jumps leaves me to like lamplighters. Is there some connection there, or do we draw on something like that? Because you still got the, like, you have a candle snuffer, right? Is the thing that you use to put out a candle in terms of other terminology that we might draw on.
Or are they just
Wicks
candle
and
wicks? They're not gutter wicks, they're candle wicks.
oh,
And then they're like, we are the light in the dark
Mm.
that the
I
tallow
like
queen
it.
originally talked about. I don't know.
I like it.
Um, this is all very cool. The funny thing is that we now have too many cool names and titles for me to figure out what to title this episode in the podcast feed. Is is this? Do I just
Wicked ideas.
is this
So terrible.
a land once magic Gutterwicks? Is it a land once magic the Tallow Queen? Like I have an embarrassment of riches. I'll be fine.
I feel like it's a good problem to have.
It is. So we have the crew has a title. Do we want this to be is this an organization that's still active? Like, have they been around for a long time? Like, were they involved in the founding, or are they a more recent thing?
I think they're more recent.
Yeah, that was my impulse too. I think they are recent, they've recently rose up with the establishment of the symbiote refugees and working together. And now they have more support from the city itself with the research they're doing, which allows them to do more inside and outside the city.
Okay.
Mhm.
Cool. That all sounds good for me. Do we feel good about moving on to Journey in the Land?
Let's do it.
Okay. Journey in the Land, you are traveling to the city we built. So we are traveling to Nopolis. After completing this table, zoom in to the story being told. Describe a character who is listening in. So listening in on the people who are traveling to the city, or listening in on us telling this story. Like, we can choose our framing here, because I don't know that it's entirely clear to me. But first, we are going to take 3 more cards.
We have the Eight of Hearts.
Okay. So when traveling with a company, traders, or army.
Company of traders.
Okay, well, we already talked some about merchants, right? Yeah. During, briefly elaborate the subject.
A holiday, the Jack of Hearts.
During a holiday.
The story is being told about traditions, which is the Five of Spades.
Okay. So I feel like this fits really nicely into what we already have, so we can just like maybe take it farther or make it more concrete. So is the company that's traveling to Nopolis, is this people from Nopolis returning, or is it people from somewhere else trading with Nopolis, where it's like maybe more fraught?
I want to say, like traders coming to Nopolis to trade. I mean, what would be a wanted commodity in Nopolis?
Well, I mean,
we've talked very little about trade in this world.
But if necromancy is the order of the day in the other cities, then Nopolis is probably the source of a lot of like everyday medicine. If their focus is healing, you got to get your good aspirin from Nopolis. Your plasters and serums.
Right, because the elite always have access to the things that are regarded as taboo or illegal, right? So your like CEO's family are going to be able to get good medicine from Nopolis, and they're just going to cover it up.
There's probably a thriving cosmetics industry as well. And if they are there healing, but they are also where all of the people who um, are quote unquote afflicted with Gutterwicks, if that's where all those people are ending up, you're gonna wind up with like an industry for, well, here's concealer that will hide those scars, or here's
Yeah, but is it as big a taboo in Nopolis as it
well,
is?
I don't think it's as big a taboo in Nopolis. I think they're goods for export.
Oh, for export.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Nopolis's exports would be medicine and cosmetics. What does it need from the rest of the world? Is this like
I think when you're working in medicines and research, there's a lot of like uncommon raw supplies you need, like plants and agriculture and things of that nature,
Yeah.
glass,
Glass.
sure?
materials, container materials, things of that nature. So this could be a
Is
glass blower traveling to.
is Nopolis big enough that they have to import some of their food because a lot of their citizenry are involved in research and manufacture as opposed to farming? Like that's a city need, right? Like they are probably importing a bunch of food, and
Mm.
the elements of everyday life that they are not super involved in the manufacture of themselves. So clothing,
Yeah.
raw
And
materials.
that could be a weakness we didn't talk about with the symbiote relationship with the Gutterwicks. Like, and we placed the city near a thriving natural colony of Gutterwicks. Do they consume more than the average resources for food and edible plants and stuff? Do they is there a ecosystem that can support them on their own, or does it make it harder to farm around the city?
I was gonna
Right.
say it definitely makes it harder if they're like, think about the pictures of lavender fields, right? Like, except they're barnacles.
Mm.
I love it.
And yeah, and so like if the land is dominated by that, you're totally gonna have a harder time like farming your industrial crops there.
Right, because like, is the can in much of the world, in much of our world, a city is just going to naturally have a bunch of cultivated agricultural land around it, right? And so you've got like you have the folks that don't live in the city but are part of the city's like functioning organism, in terms of like, oh, okay, this needs a bunch of land, people bring that inside, and then they are able to make use of all of the industry that the city has. If Nopolis is mostly surrounded by gutter instead of that, that would kind of suggest needing to take in food, or a lot of food of various types. Um,
Is Nopolis a port city?
it seems like it might need to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
so we have traders coming in to trade. Perhaps they're trading agriculture and other supplies with Nautilus and hoping to bring out medicines that are always highly wanted by the elite classes in there.
Are the traders also part of the pipeline of how people encrusted with Gutterwick get to Nopolis in the first place?
oh, like, do people pay to travel with the merchant groups?
Yeah. Or like if you are a rich family with a daughter who is covered in Gutterwick for whatever reason, right? Do you pay for her safe passage and set her up in Nopolis because you know she'll be safe there? Or do you work your way across on a ship full of suspicious sailors because you can't afford to pay your passage, but you think your life will be better in Nopolis?
Right.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, at what point, like, the other cities or governments start getting nervous about all the Gutterwick symbiote folk gathering in one city
yeah.
or not. Right now, it seems to be a very, like, we don't want them in our city anyway. They can go be Nopolis's problem right now, but
Well,
at a
is
certain
it
point.
is it just Nopolis or are there other?
I'd imagine there are others,
Yeah.
but they're treated the best in Nopolis because Nopolis has the sympathetic resources
Yeah.
and the research going on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because if is sentiment about Gutter and Gutterwick changing because of Nopolis flourishing? Right? Do they become a thought leader? It's hard not to think of like brain like or not basically being somebody from the Midwest who has moved to the coast. People move to the big city. You move to the big city maybe because there wasn't a place for you somewhere else for any number of reasons. And so if Nopolis has this like some additional dimension of cosmopolitanness, of a lot more people who are from a lot of different places, in what ways is that then additionally like culturally economically generative, and does that then have an influence?
Well, there's probably a strong tourism industry of people who want to ugh, you know, the those Gutterwicks just walk around on the street, and there's like a thrill to that probably for some people.
That is cool and gross.
Yeah, thinking about the Victorians.
Right, well, because it's like poverty tourism,
Yeah,
but like
yeah.
with supernatural stuff, because shitty people are going to be shitty.
hmm
That is cool and terrible.
there's your podcast title for this, right? Like, a land wants magic, capitalism is bad.
Well, that's
Capitalism is always the big bad.
um, I I have a very hard time not just bringing that energy to everything that I do. So I don't know that that's as useful in terms of titling, because it's just like, oh, so Mike is involved in this episode.
Yeah. We should do a challenge where we try to play this game and not make capitalism the big bad. So, we're supposed to be set during a holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so let's see.
Celebrated or observed, national or religious.
Right, and this could be a holiday for the merchants, a holiday for the city. It could be a shared holiday.
I like that our building of religion in this world has been very localized, very specific, and not like a big sort of, I don't know, overarching thing. So I don't know that I would want it to be a religious holiday unless it were like the merchants were coming into town because they knew a holiday was coming up
Mm-hmm.
and they were going to get like a good price for their goods in this one place that celebrates this particular holiday.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
What if it's more like a generalized naturalistic holiday, like a holiday surrounding the bone yards? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're supposed to go to your local boneyard and pay homage to the creatures that shaped the earth that came before or something, where like people are supposed to go to these landmarks. And I'm thinking kind of like the shrine visits at New
I was
Year's.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a terrible person because I was like, oh, like Labor Day where we're supposed to be talking about fair labor practices, but really we're just like, I love having a Monday off. Oh my gosh.
It could be a trader's chance to, sell bone charms or whatever, but
Right. Where it's like labor in the U.S.
I mean, but
labor.
that's every holiday.
Yeah, Labor Day is a federal holiday and May Day isn't.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so because I like the idea of like naturalistic holiday. Maybe Nopolis has a different relationship to it than some other places do, because in some of the other places, the people like have pulled back from boneyards and from like connecting to the broader world. But to a certain extent, you can't get away from that in Nopolis, even if you wanted to.
Is it an actual like localized religious holiday in Nopolis, but everybody else it's just a Monday off?
Hmm.
Could be.
Because Nopolis you can't get away from it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm starting to like get a connection between like the barnacles, the hardness of the barnacles, and then the boneyard's significance somehow. There's a story there too.
Barnacle and bone.
I
Barnacle and
just
bone.
I have this mental like picture, right, of like I mean we all love Whale Fall a lot because Whale Fall is so cool, but then we also love like the giant Leviathan skeleton in a desert, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like there has to be a middle ground where that Leviathan skeleton was covered in barnacles. And that's what our boneyards are at this point.
Yes.
Is like the water is receded, but there's still all of this like growth on it, and it is still itself a very localized ecosystem or magic.
Love it.
I did in fact write a whole novel about a city built in and among the bones of a titan from kind of this setting's equivalent of the Titanomachy in Greek mythology. So, like, is Nopolis like is it by like okay so there was an ice age and so that receded and so then that created the shape of something and then like the megafauna whale fall something like
As I
I
say,
feel
it's
like
a port town. Maybe like the megafauna whales all like come to this one place to die, and it's like their ribs just create these caverns upon caverns of bones all in one place
I love that. Yeah.
until it's like this giant mountain-sized nest of bone.
so
Yeah.
is that just in the water? Is there like an island that's bone?
I was gonna say, is that a hallowed place?
It's gotta be.
It's gotta be. Yeah.
Because that's a hell of an image.
I yeah.
um,
Just because you'd have the sound of the water rushing through it
hmm.
constantly, all those bones all being crushed down over time.
But
Oh,
also there's a certain musicality to it, right? And
mm-hmm.
all of the little hollow places that the water like trickles through and that sort of like chiming sound of bone on bone and shell on shell with our barnacle friends.
Yes, yes.
So like obviously it sounds like the ghosts of the past are whispering to you. And some people
Haunted.
yeah, some people don't care for that.
Yeah, and so then obviously the story being told is about whether this is a tradition or just a commercial holiday. And well, I guess that's maybe not the story being told, but that's like the underlying context of why the story is being told. But what's the story?
Yeah. It's
Is
really
this
just so those traders can sell bone charms. Come on.
is it the story? Is it something about the whales? About why the whales chose this spot? Why about why the megafauna all over the world tended to die, return to the one same place to die and create these boneyards of the world? Something about tradition, bringing
Because like
together.
because
Is
I
it about the Tallow Queen calling the whales?
Oh.
Is it something about, like, I mean, maybe that's how she became queen, right? Like maybe there was an energy crisis
Mm-hmm.
and she was able to somehow, like, call some of these places into being. And maybe this island is where she stood and like where she called the 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 whales, the whale version of the megafauna.
The
Right.
Towel Queen, we know in this modern era, the legend is warped that she brought magic to the world. She gave magic to the peoples. What if the tale is the tale of how she did that? Is by knowing that the magic was trapped up and locked up selfishly in the bones of all the creatures of the world, and they were keeping it for themselves, and that she was so righteous and holy that she was able to call the animals to dash themselves upon the earth itself and sacrifice their bones to unlock the magic, to release it into the earth so that her children could benefit from it for generations to come. And that, my children, is why there are boneyards across the land,
Mm.
promising for future generations that we shall always have magic for our benefit and ours alone, and not for
Right.
the beasts of the earth.
So before that, I was thinking like, do we do something where uh, either a theory or the reality is that gutter is like petroleum from the megafauna? But that might be too much capitalism on top of capitalism.
No, I love it. We just didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah.
Love that I went like fable and
Yeah.
you went like environmental hazard.
Well, it's like, and these are not mutually incompatible.
No, they're not. Because
Um,
you could weave that in too.
Also, bone charms are buy two get one free this weekend.
mm-hmm.
And if you know, if you don't buy these bone charms, people look bad, like people look on that poorly. But
Right.
also, we're all way too busy to actually go to the boneyard.
Right. Is it like because everybody has to buy the bone charms, and is that like a recreation of uh, the queen calling all of the animals? Right. Like we are as if like the animals aren't around anymore, so we have to assemble the bones, and like do people then get little bone charms and then go and make kind of fake mountains?
Yeah. Or claiming the magic for themselves by taking their own little bone charm. Because
I mean,
in
maybe
this world, like the whole division between the candle creatures and the humans is that we've turned away from the natural magic kind of sources. And
I was gonna say maybe part of the warping is that everybody takes their own bone charm instead of communally creating a mountain of bones. And
yes, I
maybe
love
that's
that.
the actual origin of some of these boneyards, right? Like the creatures and people collecting these things in specific places.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe originally the holiday was to, make to maintain the boneyards, make sure that they're preserved and the bones are refreshed and added year after year. And that part of the holiday has fallen by the wayside as well. And now it's just become commercial thing where you can sell bone charms that people take away, and it's the completely opposite. I love that. Awesome, Marianne.
Yeah, because there'd be people in Nopolis who are not, um, who don't partake in local, like long-term tradition.
Mhm.
So you'd have like, oh, okay, the merchant's son, who is getting treatment for Gutterwick, like doesn't do the communal thing in Nopolis. He does the version that he's used to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably you have, like, one of the things going on underneath Naupolis is all of the people who consider themselves candlewicks are like buying their bone charms and bringing them together.
Right, because like
I like that.
I love a ritual.
because if a bunch of people like view it really superficially, and so it's like stylish to have the bone charms, but then they throw them out. People like do people take these things that have been discarded once their like social utility is done, and then repurpose them to return them to like an older tradition.
I think so, especially if they're made of the bones of smaller creatures that are like what is left after the industrialization of magic, right? So like the boneyards are these megafauna and these huge whales in the case of our island. But what people are buying bone charms of are like little fish vertebrae. And so there's that relationship, but that's what the world has come to.
Right. Yeah, because you can get some of that nostalgia of like, oh well, in the years of the Tallow Queen, the Leviathans, you know, were so big that they blotted out the sun, and you know, insert name of creature that we have left is all that remains, and it's like what they're actually describing is like a salmon.
Yeah.
But you know, a salmon's bones versus a whale's bones.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Because that also gives us some of that post fantasy vibe of like, oh, we're not in the era of giants anymore.
Yeah.
Because like in Dark Souls, most of the Dark Souls video games, there are giants, and the giants are usually gone, much in the same way that like Titanomachy has the Titans, and like some Old Testament stuff talks about like, you know, the Nephilim were giants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably this is why I was able to play like 15 minutes of Shadow of the Colossus and then was just like stricken with guilt.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think some people reach their no too sad I'm the bad guy point in that game way faster than others.
Definitely did. I noped out so early. I was like, I just can't do it. I can't strip this world of these creatures. So, yeah.
Yeah, I liked the idea of like, oh, okay, it's all boss fights, and these creatures are so gigantic, and you're treating it like a puzzle, but it's too sad.
Yeah.
Like, just move on, my guy.
I was also full of dread. I was waiting for something terrible to happen as a consequence of killing these huge creatures
Oh,
who
sure.
are so obviously fundamentally part of the landscape. So,
Yeah, like I didn't get far enough in the game to know like how that is manifested. I know that there's some visual indicators of like corruption or something or whether,
yeah.
but like uh you know, a different version of that would be like every time you kill one of them, one of the colors in the game's palette goes away. And then like for the last one, all you have left is red, and it's like everything is blood. But that's a whole different rendition from the same core premise, and that's fine. It's a different thing. So
Yes, we're talking about traditions.
now we've
And
made
it's
this
not
other
about
video
the
game
law
sadder.
side. A bunch of drunk sailors weeping about the loss of the Leviathan
Right.
is what we have ended on.
Yeah, well, because like I think we can tie this back in because then there can be folklore about like, oh well, the world used to be so much more full of colors.
Yeah.
The eye like,
Mm-hmm.
oh okay, well culturally, you know, in the Mediterranean you don't get you don't have like there's no blue until time X or whatever, and so the sea is described as green and so on and so forth, and so like because in a fantasy setting you can literally have colors that don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think that brings us back to candlelit, right? Like the whole quality of the light has changed.
Mm.
And it used to be very much about like this candlelit safety, you know, from all sorts of things, and this opportunity to pursue pleasure and leisure and that kind of thing. And now with industrialization, I think we move away from like that soft, small candlelight into some more like harshly lit things. But there are still people burning candles to try to hold on to that feeling.
See, and I was going to twist it just the other way because I was going to say it used to be that we would only need the candles when the at night when it got too dark to see, but then at the day we would have the freedom to go out into the sun and enjoy the natural daylight we had. And now with industrialization, we are only ever inside working by candlelight.
Mm.
So we both made it sad just by twisting it in opposite directions.
Right.
Writers.
I like the idea though that like everybody's working by their own candle now instead of sharing light. So you also have to have more candles
Mm-hmm.
because everybody has to have their own
Exactly.
instead of like a big happy commune of candles. I don't know.
Instead of all going out into the sun together, who would do that?
Yeah,
I'll just stay inside.
yeah.
There's too many UVs. I'm pale.
We say in front of Zoom where we have sat all day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I have to. Uh, Part of why we got a dog was because that I had realized that working from home, I could go several days without going outside. And so the dog needs to go outside. But then we live where there's a lot of UV in the summer. And so I've never used as much sunscreen as I've used since we got a dog. Because the dog, I can't tell the dog, no, we need to wait until there's fewer UVs. The dog needs to go and the dog needs to go.
I live in a basement and there are a few windows, but they are very high set in the wall and they're very like deep as well, deep casements. So we don't get a lot of light from them. So sometimes I have found myself like sitting here where the window is actually underneath the front porch.
Hmm.
So there's not like it's a window onto the bottom of the steps, right? So sometimes I check the weather app and I'm like, you could just go to the door and go outside. You could go outside. But instead, I sit and I check the weather app and I realize, you know, it's been 3 days since I have been like outside for any length of time. I need to
Yeah.
go out
Well,
and
and
touch grass.
like for a lot of people at different stages of the pandemic, if you were in a position where you didn't have to go and like work at a grocery store or other like essential things, and especially for people in places where there were genuinely lockdowns, like re- uh,
Well,
changing your relationship to outside.
yeah, I mean, when at the start of the pandemic, my husband and I were in a tiny apartment building in Seattle, and just the fraughtness of even navigating shared hallways and elevators and all that shit was we didn't go outside. And then we got out here, and we've just been so cautious with health conditions and disabilities and stuff that we
Yeah.
realized like we haven't gone outside. We haven't left the house this week. We should fix that.
Yeah. Okay.
Candles, man.
Candles.
Candles.
So, if you are watching or listening and you're a publisher and you want to give us money to write stories about this cool goth setting, you probably should contact Speculate, and then I will contact everybody. But we will also do outros so that people can, so we can make it as easy as possible for y'all to get in touch with us and give us money. But before we do that, I want to pull back and maybe like talk about the game in general, or are there further things we want to talk about our candle wicks and our gutter barnacles and things?
I do have a thing that I was thinking about because we are playing Dungeons and Dragons, and and I did just go see the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which was delightful. Um, and one of the things that I have always kind of struggled with in Dungeons and Dragons as a setting is the idea of the Underdark being like the bad place where all the bad things come from. And one of the things I particularly like about like the idea of an incrustation growing under the city and like in these caves and all of these like boneyard caves and that sort of thing is is moving away from that, is like what we talked about at the beginning when AJ was like the dark isn't bad, it's not bad. And I like that we get to build that in
Mm-hmm.
like at the like the ingredients level.
Yeah, I like the idea, especially like the way we set it up with the those boneyards like becoming like a place of solace and sanctuary,
Yeah.
as well as a place of learning and research and knowledge too. I think it's a neat twist on the whole Underdark thing because I think, yeah, there's been steps made to kind of rejuvenate that idea and add depth to it. But I think there's so much more you can do. And I like the idea, yeah, especially like taking the idea of like catacombs, necropolis kind of place and making it more a place of like thriving life and change and yeah, sanctuary. Because so many in so many other cultures, going to your dead is not a scary, dark, or even like haunted in a negative tone
Yeah.
thing. It's a solace to go visit your dead. And I think I love to see that more in fantasy too. So it's neat to be able to work that in with this game.
Right, because
The
like,
game has some neat prompts for that. Yeah.
yeah, and I think we'd already kind of touched on that with uh, we got to necromancy, and then we're like, okay, but let's not do necromancy the same way that necromancy usually is talked about, like, oh, necromancy is bad in a categorically distinct fashion than all of these other magics, including mind control.
Commercial necromancy is bad. The industrialization, like that's when it's a problem. But I like too that like it's it is like the incorporation of all of the different phases, right? Like even at the industrial level, they're not rejecting like the cycles of life. They're just they're regimenting them, right? So it's not like they're trying to actually deny that death is a thing, but they are like, how can we how can we regiment this and like work our way around this part of the problem? And I like that it's coming at it from a slightly different direction instead of just like, well, how do we beat death? Well, we don't, but
Right. Yeah, it's I'm reminded of the quote, how do we monetize the rot?
mm-hmm.
And so like one of the ways that a system can become more exploitative is looking at things that had worked just fine and going, okay, but how can this be better for us specifically? And we don't care about anyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the classic conversation about advertising, right? Like the most effective advertising often creates a problem that you did not know that you had until you watched advertising offering a solution to it. Like advertising sells you both the problem and the solution in many cases.
Yeah, and like that intention with the thing that is certainly like common wisdom in publishing when I was kind of on the staff side of like nothing is better than a personal recommendation from somebody you trust. And
Mm-hmm.
so you manufacture that through creating thought leaders and like valorizing influencers and using like parasocial trust to be a validator for products as opposed to like individual interpersonal relationships, where it's like, oh, well, insert name of celebrity says that this book is good, and so I will buy it because that is a recommendation that can be produced in an economic system in a way that we as friends recommend books to one another cannot be.
God, what do influencers look like in this world?
I was just thinking about that. I was like, what does social media in this world look like? If they have, I mean, there's always some kind of social media, right?
I
Like,
mean, they gotta be like the really like studly kinetic magicians, maybe. Like they like do all this, but they have no Gutterwick scars whatsoever, and they're just so they do the solo performances with the ritual dancer backups, but they're like pop star magicians.
what does this world's version of the seminal classic film Strictly Ballroom look like?
Yeah, it's like, is it is the kind of amateur character, is that like, oh, this is a person who doesn't know magic, right? Or it's like a person who does dancing that isn't magic,
Yeah.
and then like gets brought into this like elevated high status world of
The typical Yuri on Ice
But it's
story.
also like, it's also right about the story of this like industrial magic dancer who is reconnecting
right,
with those wild magic
yeah,
roots.
new steps,
Invigorating. Yeah.
What does teen counterculture look like in this world?
right? Is that like teenagers uh, continuing to engage with Gutter to get Gutterwick scars to look cool
On purpose?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say there's got to be like a tattoo industry that replicates Gutterwick scars and like images of Gutterwicks and that sort of thing. Like, we've reinvented the goth subculture.
Right. Yeah, and like the probably places where the like personness or sentience or sapience of Gutter and Gutterwick is denied, and so then like personalizing and anthropomorphizing those is counterculture,
Yeah.
like tree huggers but for Gutter.
Gutterwicks.
Yeah.
What does farming actually look like?
Yeah, without the candle creatures.
Yeah.
Because
Like,
yeah, technology progression in this world is interesting because like we've focused very much on like necromancy solutions and stuff too, but there's still going to be like engineers in this world
the
too.
necromancy solution. And like, is it a steam capable culture? Like, what level of technology?
Yeah, we got stuck on the candle aspect, which is cool, but like there's got to be other progressions in other areas too. So like how does that wind in?
Yeah, for that I feel like I'd want to flesh out more of the geopolitics of like, okay, we have this one city and we have the idea of them being distinct from kind of states or city states that they are in some kind of contact with. I'd kind of want to like reverse engineer from, okay, what are things like now? In what way is the places we have now divisions or unifications of what came before?
Yeah. And you know, with magic, like is it equally spread across the world, or is there some places like where there's not many boneyards or something that has less access, and so maybe they've had to supplement with different kinds of technology progression, and then like
Right.
again go back to the question, who does that ostracize and who does that leave out, and
Yeah, because
that's how you get a whole world.
that makes me think about like migratory patterns and ocean currents, and that the boneyards would like follow those areas, and those like, okay, does that do migratory patterns then become the equivalent of ley lines? And like, okay, magic is gonna be dense along these areas because of that's where the flow of these beings are.
Interesting.
does magic have different flavors determined by the kind of megafauna that your ley lines are built from, right?
Right.
Like Napolis is a port city. We've got these Leviathan skeletons. But what about X other city that is built on the bones of like fantasy pterodactyls?
Yeah, yeah. Or ones that are built entirely on fish bones, or ones up in the Alps that are entirely giant
Goat.
mammoth bones, or goats, or birds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what do all of these different giant creatures like? Surely somewhere there is a fantasy equivalent of a giant sloth. And what's that city known for?
Right. And because you can kind of go either way of, well, the magic is like, oh, okay, well, in the goat place, the magic is about like fortitude, and so then goats are associated with fortitude because that's the magic that comes from them. And the cultural flow can go either way, where we come to think about goats as being tough because the magic that comes from them we associate with this.
I think we got to remember there's that existing tension because the codified version of magic now says you shouldn't be doing magic that way at all. It should be all through kinetic production. So any bone magic is
Right.
going to be counter
Yeah.
in some
And
way.
Well,
do
is it codified in every country?
right.
That's the thing.
Like, because do you do the goat dance when you need to do the goat magic? Like how removed is it?
Yeah.
Is it removed along all axes or along some axes? Where it's like, well, we don't do the material thing anymore. We don't go out there anymore, but there is some continuity.
Mm.
And like how much those diverge historically will probably vary based on a bunch of other factors, right?
So, related question, because it is a room full of writers. I am curious how similar this is to your process of world building when you are writing, because it is very different from like my process of world building, which is why I think these world building games are fun, right? Because they're very tightly focused on building the world and doing so in a very deliberate world first way, right? Like we have all of this culture, but all of this culture has come out of the world. So when you are writing, are you coming up with worlds and filling them with culture, or are you sort of doing the reverse, or like what's your methodology, y'all?
I mean, for me, this is. I would love to say this is my methodology, but it's not. um, I'll pick. I start often like with like a cool idea, and then I'll start out with some of these questions, but I jump to writing way faster. I would
Yeah.
love to take some ideas and play this game with some friends who would probably need to help me. So I get too excited and I just start writing.
Right.
Um, that's just the kind of writer I am. And then I figure out stuff and I ask questions as I go, and it complicates things and makes me redraft things and stuff. But that's part of my process. I think this is fantastic, especially for like if you're developing a game world or something where things
Sure.
need to be able to change. You need to have that large vision first up.
Yeah.
But so often when I'm writing a story, I'm so focused on the bones of the story first of all, um, that I can afford to take the narrower view first and then expand. Whereas this is really cool for the big expansive view, and then you narrow in, like with the
Right.
way the game was set up.
Yeah, because
So
the game then even has a little bit of that zoom in, but I feel like if I were going to do a hack of this game with a bunch of different prompts but using a lot of the same structure, I might go one step beyond Journey in the Land to either give more specifics on the prompt of like what do you mean tell the story, to like detail the people and then tell the story or talk about the story that they're telling, or like have a more concrete intermediary step. Because that would then lead to my process, because I am almost always working premise first. Basically, where like I pitch myself. So Geekomancy was, what if fandom was a magic system? And I spun out from there of like, okay, so this is a magic system. Then I start writing like, oh, okay, well, I want to have other weird passion-based magic systems, because a big touchstone for that series was the RPG Unknown Armies, which has like obsession-based magic. Genrenauts was, what if being genre savvy was the special skill that let a character stand out. And so when I'm world building from that, I ruminate on the premise, and then I usually pretty quickly go to, well, who's the character that incarnates this premise? Who can carry this into some kind of adventurous context?
That's super interesting to me, because I start 100% of the time with a very specific character voice, and I discover like everything else through the perspective of that character. So like if I were writing something that ended up with a world like this, it would start with a character. It would start with like one of those traders drunk and, crying about the Leviathan, and like the person who is in the hold with them, like, why the hell am I stuck in this hold with this crying sailor who is being sent to the city, right? Like it would start so specifically with their viewpoints, and then everything else would unfold from that. So like as a writer's room game, I think it's so fun to play this kind of structural game, and I like that this one is so um I don't know, just so focused on the collaborative build,
Yeah.
instead of taking turns where everyone decrees something.
Right. Yeah, and I think you could play this with more strictly delineated authority of like, this is your card, so you get last say. Like the strictest bit that we get, I think, is at the very beginning, where it says each player gets the final say on at least one paint. Right. Yeah. Otherwise, a lot of the other stuff is really pretty loose, and it just is like, okay, discuss, and each player should answer 2 questions or a total of 6 questions. Like, so there's a little bit there, but any of these games, like, the designer is not going to come and get us if we don't, quote unquote, play it right, because the game has prompts and the game is a prompt. I find that I enjoy taking a little, like, kind of a core of an idea for a story or a setting, and then doing not necessarily something like this game, but something like what we were doing when we like stepped a little bit away from an individual prompt into like overall discussion.
Yeah, I think what the term I use, because I married a software engineer, is rubber ducking.
Sure.
Just talking it out.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I know you said this was the first like world building game that you have had like actual playtime in. Like what do you leave sort of thinking of the genre of world building games?
Oh, I think they're a ton of fun. I've played solo play, like solo narrative games, journaling games, where you have prompts and you're writing a character through a story. And those are a lot of fun, but the collaborative aspect of these is just, candy for a writer's brain. You get so much more when you're bouncing ideas off other people and refining them with other people, than you do just going with the flow, writing and working through these alone. So I think they're great. And yeah, anyone wants to play again, just tag me.
This does really make me want to go to the Strange Friends, the kind of one of the main groups that makes Speculate stuff, which is also all writers. And be like, cool. So I played a Land Once Magic with Marianne and AJ, and it totally ruled. So we need to play one of these world building games, and then do like a quote unquote more traditional RPG from that, because the actual play team that I know that does this type of thing most extensively is Friends at the Table, which I mentioned way earlier with like Post Fantasy, where they will do like a mini season and play like a half dozen or more different RPGs and not just world building games. And so they have almost like an anthology show that builds out a setting, and then they do one game for a longer period of time, which I think is a very cool approach.
Yeah, so this would be a great way to like build a campaign world with your players.
Yep. And then everybody has tons of buy-in, because everybody was materially and creatively involved at a deep level.
And no one gets to hide the lore from you, our DM.
Yes. We say only because the lore is cool and we want to know more.
Oh, cool. We want to know.
So I think we will probably wrap there. We have done quite a lot of thinking and talking about this cool bone and candle megafauna and like wax barnacle people gestalt thing stuff, because it's awesome. But now I will again ask folks to remind us who you are and what you do, where we can find you, and if you want to plug a project, please go ahead and do that, starting with Marianne.
My name is Marianne Kirby. I am a sort of horror writer and fat activist. I do have books out and short stories and that sort of thing. I usually am just like, Google, please. I don't want to plug my own project. I am going to plug Neon Hemlock, a publisher of queer speculative fiction that is publishing novellas, anthologies, chapbooks, weird zines, like so much amazing stuff coming out of Neon Hemlock, including like my favorite thing I read in the entirety of last year, which is a novella called The Killing Ground by Joan Tierney. So highly recommend neonhemlock.com, y'all. I co-host Neon Hemlock Live with Dave Ring. We have readers from amazing like writers all over the world. That's on Instagram. Follow Neon Hemlock on Instagram and basically everywhere.
Cool. Do you want to throw out a social for you?
I am the Rotund pretty much everywhere. Mastodon, Twitter when I'm still there. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm like if it's there, like I believe in name squatting at the very least.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, AJ.
Yeah, I am AJ Hackwith. As I said, I'm a writer of fantasy, occasional sci-fi kissy books. My recent trilogy, Hell's Library, is out in stores. The first book is The Library of the Unwritten. The most recent book that finishes the trilogy is The God of Lost Words. Please buy it and support it if you like fantasy and nerdy stuff and library books and library magic and heroes, demons, hell, all sorts of fun stuff. Heaven's the bad guy. It's all sorts of fun stuff. You can find me in most places on the internet, AJ Hackwith. I've been pretty quiet online lately, but I always appreciate a hi and whatever tag you want to do. And yeah, I love playing games and love reading books. So if that's your thing, follow me.
Very cool.
What I got.
So I want to say thank you so much to Marianne and to AJ for joining me. We do this other game together, but I enjoy a lot getting to also play RPGs with people that I already have like a friendly relationship with in terms of like colleagues or friends that I know otherwise. Like I got to play the game that I made with a couple of friends who one is my wife's roommate from when I met my now wife and her spouse, and so we did like a double date RPG thing. And so adding RPGs to your established friendships may be fruitful depending on how those relationships already go. I recommend trying this out if you feel like trying to tell stories together with people that you already like. It may be easier to make more role-playing gamers that way than to meet random gaming people, unless you have really good session zero work and safety tools, but use those all the time anyway. That is a separate rant. You can find bonus features, including discussions about how to have good RPG sessions and games that I and the other Speculate co-hosts like. All of those things and more by becoming a subscriber at patreon.com/speculate. I have been your facilitator today, aka one of the co-hosts of Speculate. I'm Mike Underwood. I write as Michael R. Underwood. My stuff is inclusive, found family, action adventure for the most part. My latest series is also my first series, which starts with the book Geekomancy, which is the What If Fandom Was a Magic System thing. I also do the Genrenauts series of dimension hopping story heists. AJ has a dog there, which is very distracting. So if you're listening, know that there's a dog here, and this dog is very cute. You can find me on Twitter at Mike R. Underwood. I stream video games at twitch.tv/turbotango. And you can listen to more cool things that Speculate has done by going to speculatesf.com. You can find videos of all of the shows that we've done in video form at speculatesf.com, but also youtube.com/ArvinEleron. And this will have streamed on twitch.tv/ArvinEleron. And you can watch future shows from Speculate at that channel. In fact, please make sure to go and follow the lovely folks who join me as guests for this game. And we will have more Speculate fun for you in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care. Bye.